Hello, wonderful people. Welcome to Bender, your story destination. We have an absolute treat for you today. What if Harry ran away to France at age 5 and became the secret prodigy of the Delacour family? If you're enjoying these stories, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps the stories coming. With that said, let the adventure begin. Chapter 1, The Runaway Prince. The cupboard under the stairs was dark and cramped, but 5-year-old Harry Potter had grown used to the spiders that crawled along the ceiling. They were, after all, the closest things he had to friends. A single, bare bulb hanging from a frayed cord provided the only light, though it had been days since Uncle Vernon had allowed him to use it. Harry curled into a tight ball on his thin mattress, his stomach growling painfully, punishment for what his uncle had called his freakishness. All he'd done was turn his teacher's wig blue. He hadn't meant to, it just happened when she'd yelled at him for something Dudley had done. But trying to explain that to Uncle Vernon had only made things worse. 3 more days, Harry whispered to himself, counting on his small fingers. 3 more days until they'd have to let him out to go back to school. Then he could at least get lunch. A loud thump on the cupboard door made him flinch. "Boy! Stop that muttering in there or you'll get another day," Uncle Vernon bellowed. Harry bit his lip and went silent. He reached under the loose floorboard where he kept his treasures, a broken toy soldier Dudley had discarded, a colorful marble, and a crumpled photograph he'd rescued from the bin, a woman with red hair laughing at something off camera. He didn't know who she was, but sometimes he pretended she was his mother. The sound of the television blared from the living room. Harry heard the weatherman mention an unseasonably warm May and how ferries to France were running despite choppy waters. France. The word stirred something in Harry. Miss Appleby had shown them pictures of the Eiffel Tower last week. It looked magical, like something from a storybook his aunt would never let him read. The evening dragged on. Harry heard Dudley thundering up and down the stairs, deliberately jumping on the step directly above his cupboard, sending dust showering down. Eventually, the house went quiet as the Dursleys went to bed. Harry couldn't sleep. His stomach hurt too much, and his back still stung from where Uncle Vernon had struck him with the belt. He'd never hit him that hard before. Something had changed in his uncle's eyes today, something frightening that made Harry think the cupboard might become a permanent home. A strange feeling crept through him, the same tingling sensation that happened right before the freakish things occurred. But this time it wasn't fear driving it, it was determination. Harry waited until the house was filled with Uncle Vernon's snores. Then, with trembling fingers, he pushed against the cupboard door. It was locked, of course, it always was. But as his fingers brushed against the latch, he felt that tingling again, stronger now. "Please," he whispered, focusing on the lock as hard as he could. "Please open." There was a soft click, and the door swung open. Harry froze, expecting thundering footsteps and Uncle Vernon's purple face. But the house remained silent except for the ticking of the hallway clock. 2:17 a.m. Moving with the quietness that life with the Dursleys had taught him, Harry slipped into the kitchen. He grabbed a plastic bag from under the sink and filled it with whatever he could find, 2 apples, half a loaf of bread, a chunk of cheese wrapped in foil. He added a bottle of water from the fridge. His heart hammering, Harry crept to the front door. Another lock to deal with, but this time he wasn't so afraid. He touched it, concentrated, and felt the same warm energy flow through his fingertips. The lock clicked open. The night air hit his face as he stepped outside, cool but not cold. Harry had no plan beyond escape, but anything seemed better than another day locked in the cupboard. He clutched his plastic bag of food and the precious photograph tucked into his oversized pocket, and started walking. By dawn, Harry had reached the outskirts of Little Whinging. His legs ached, and fear gnawed at him, fear that the Dursleys would find him, drag him back, lock him away forever. But there was something else too, something he'd never felt before, freedom. He followed road signs, hiding whenever cars approached. When a truck stopped at a petrol station, Harry snuck into its open back while the driver was paying. He curled up behind some boxes, praying he wouldn't be discovered. Hours passed in a rumbling darkness. When the truck finally stopped and the driver stepped away, Harry peered out and saw seagulls wheeling overhead. The air smelled different here, salty. A sign read, Dover Ferry Terminal, France. The word from the weatherman came back to him. France was away, far away from the Dursleys. Somewhere new, somewhere they couldn't find him. Without really understanding what he was doing, Harry followed the crowds toward the massive ships. Getting aboard should have been impossible for a small boy alone, but Harry had always been good at not being noticed when he needed to be. He slipped past a guard who suddenly found his attention drawn to a flock of seagulls fighting over chips. Harry didn't question his luck, he just kept moving, staying close to a large family with so many children that one more small boy went unnoticed. The ferry's engines rumbled beneath his feet. Harry found a quiet corner behind some life jacket containers and curled up, munching on his bread and cheese. Through a nearby window, he watched England grow smaller until it disappeared entirely. He had no idea what would happen when the ferry reached France. He didn't speak French, had no money, no plan. But as the white cliffs of Dover vanished into the horizon, Harry felt the tight knot in his chest begin to loosen. Whatever came next had to be better than what he was leaving behind. Apollon Delacour frowned at the strange magical disturbance registering on her detection charm. As a senior member of France's Department of Magical Anomalies, she'd been monitoring the northern coast for weeks following reports of unusual energy signatures. The British ministry claimed they were conducting standard training exercises, but something about their explanation felt off. This signature, however, was different, raw, untrained, and distinctly not British in its magical pattern. It had appeared suddenly in Calais and was now moving south. "Tu es que c'est?" She murmured, her silvery blonde hair falling over her shoulder as she leaned closer to the glowing map. Her husband, Sebastian, looked up from his desk where he was reviewing diplomatic correspondence. At 50, he remained handsome, his dark hair now distinguished with streaks of silver at the temples. "Another anomaly?" he asked, setting aside a letter bearing the British ministry's seal. "Yes, but not like the others. This one's younger." Apollon's fingers traced the pulsing light. "Much younger. And moving without magical transportation." Sebastian frowned. "A child? Perhaps." Apollon grabbed her wand and the light summer cloak hanging by the door of their home office. "I'm going to investigate." "Take Henri with you," Sebastian said, referring to their security detail. Since his appointment as France's magical foreign affairs director, threats against the family had increased. Apollon nodded, though the set of her jaw told him she considered it unnecessary. Partvilla witches were hardly defenseless, as many unfortunate attackers had learned over the centuries. Within the hour, Apollon and Henri were tracking the magical signature through a small village south of Calais. The rain had started, a gentle but persistent drizzle that misted the countryside in grey. The trail led them to a roadside ditch where they found a small, soaked figure huddled under a makeshift shelter of branches and leaves. "Mon Dieu," Apollon whispered as she approached. "C'est un enfant." The boy couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, painfully thin with clothes that hung off him like wet sacks. His black hair was plastered to his forehead, partially obscuring what appeared to be a scar. He looked up at her approach, and Apollon felt her breath catch at the intensity of his green eyes, wary, intelligent, and far too old for his young face. "Hello," she said in English, noticing his confusion at her earlier French. "Are you lost?" The boy shook his head, clutching a soggy plastic bag to his chest. "Not lost," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Running away." Apollon crouched down, keeping a non-threatening distance. "That's a very brave thing to do, especially all the way to France." "My name is Apollon. What's yours?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting to Henri who stood back, giving them space. "Harry," he finally said. "Harry Potter." Apollon couldn't stop her sharp intake of breath. Everyone in the magical world knew that name, the infant who had somehow defeated Britain's darkest wizard. The boy who had vanished into the Muggle world under Dumbledore's protection. Harry Potter, she repeated, studying him carefully. The scar on his forehead confirmed it, shaped like a lightning bolt, just as the story said. What are you doing so far from home? They were mean, he said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Apollon noticed the bruises on his arms, partially hidden by his oversized sleeves, and the careful way he held himself, as if in pain. Anger flared within her, making her Vila heritage stir dangerously. Who had dared harm this child? Dumbledore's chosen guardians. Are you hungry, Harry? She asked, forcing her voice to remain gentle. He nodded hesitantly. I have a home not far from here, with food and dry clothes. Would you like to come with me? Just until we figure things out. Harry looked at her for a long moment, those green eyes seeming to peer into her very soul. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. You're magic too, he said, not a question but a statement. Yes, Apollon answered, startled. How did you know? Harry shrugged. You feel like it. Like me. Apollon exchanged a significant look with Henri. Such sensitivity in one so young was remarkable. Can I ask you something, Harry? The people you ran away from, were they your family? The Dursleys, Harry said, the name coming out like something bitter. They're not my real family. My real parents died. And the Dursleys, they didn't like magic. Harry's eyes widened. You know about the freakish stuff? That's what Uncle Vernon called it when strange things happened. Apollon felt that dangerous anger again but kept her voice steady. It's not freakish, Harry. It's magic. And it's a gift. She held out her hand. Would you like to see? When he nodded, she whispered a quiet incantation. A small ball of blue light formed in her palm, hovering and dancing like a living thing. Harry's face transformed, wonder replacing wariness. I can do that, he whispered. This and much more, with proper training, Apollon said, closing her hand and extinguishing the light. Come, let's get you somewhere warm. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Harry took it. The Delacour estate sprawled across the countryside south of Paris, its elegant architecture hidden from Muggle eyes by ancient enchantments. To those rare few permitted past its wards, the chateau revealed itself gradually, first the immaculate gardens with their magical flora, then the gleaming white stone of the main house with its blue-tiled roof and graceful towers. Sebastian was waiting at the entrance when Apollon arrived with Harry. His eyes widened when he saw the small boy clutching his wife's hand. Sebastian, Apollon said in rapid French, we need to speak privately. This is more complicated than I anticipated. Their 8-year-old daughter, Fleur, peered around her father's legs, her silvery blonde hair identical to her mother's. She studied the newcomer with undisguised curiosity. Who's he? She asked in French, wrinkling her nose slightly at Harry's bedraggled appearance. This is Harry, Apollon answered in English for Harry's benefit. He will be staying with us for a little while. Harry, this is my daughter Fleur, and my husband, Sebastian. Harry looked overwhelmed, shrinking slightly behind Apollon. Sebastian smiled warmly, also switching to English. Welcome to our home, Harry. You must be tired after your journey. Lisette will show you where you can wash up and find some dry clothes, then perhaps you'd like something to eat. At the mention of food, Harry perked up slightly. A house elf appeared, not with the loud crack that characterized British elves, but with a gentle shimmer of displacement. Harry jumped, eyes wide. This is Lisette, Sebastian explained. She helps care for our home. Lisette will take good care of young monsieur, the elf said with a curtsy, her French accent evident even in English. Unlike the ragged pillowcases of British house elves, she wore a neat blue uniform with the Delacour crest. It's all right, Apollon assured Harry. You can go with her. We'll be right here when you're done. After a moment's hesitation, Harry followed the elf up the sweeping staircase, looking back once uncertainly. As soon as he was out of earshot, Sebastian turned to his wife. "What's going on? Who is this child?" "Harry Potter," Apollon said simply. Sebastian's normally composed diplomatic expression faltered. "Potter? The boy who lived? That's impossible. He's protected by Dumbledore, hidden away in Britain." "Not anymore, it seems. He ran away from his guardians, Muggles called Dursley. Sebastian, they were abusing him. I saw the bruises myself." Fleur, who had been following the conversation with the precocious attention of a child raised in political circles, gasped. "The Harry Potter? From the stories?" "Yes, ma petite, but this is not a story," Apollon said gently. "This is a real boy who has been hurt and needs help." Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing through diplomatic implications. "Dumbledore will be looking for him. The British ministry too, once they discover he's missing." "Let them look," Apollon said fiercely. "I won't send that child back to people who beat him and call his magic freakish." "You didn't see him, Sebastian, half-starved, sleeping in a ditch in the rain, afraid of his own shadow." Sebastian knew that tone. His wife's Vila heritage made her particularly protective of children, a trait that had only intensified since becoming a mother. "We need to think carefully," he said. "This isn't just about one child, no matter how famous. This is about international magical relations. If we're discovered harboring Harry Potter without informing the British, then we don't let them discover him," Apollon said. "Not until we understand the situation better. Not until we're sure he'll be safe." Sebastian sighed, knowing he was already losing this argument. "What are you suggesting?" "We give him sanctuary. Just for a while. Learn what really happened, why Dumbledore placed him with abusive Muggles. Then we make an informed decision. And if that decision brings us into conflict with Britain's magical government?" Apollon lifted her chin. "Then we face that when it comes. But I will not abandon a magical child in need, Sebastian. I cannot." Before Sebastian could respond, a soft voice came from the doorway. "He has a lightning scar, Papa. Just like in the stories." They turned to see their younger daughter, 4-year-old Gabrielle, standing there with wide blue eyes. Unlike her more reserved sister, Gabrielle had none of Fleur's caution around strangers. "I showed him my room," she announced. "He doesn't talk much." Sebastian and Apollon exchanged alarmed glances. "Gabrielle, Sherry, you shouldn't bother our guest," Apollon said, moving to usher her youngest away. "He's not bothered," Gabrielle said with a child's certainty. "He's just sad. And hungry. I told Lizette to bring extra pastries." "Where is Harry now?" Sebastian asked. "With Lizette. She's finding him clothes." Gabrielle tugged at her father's hand. "Can he stay, Papa? He needs a family." Sebastian looked at his youngest daughter's earnest face, then at his wife's determined one. He'd spent 20 years in magical diplomacy, navigating the complex relationships between wizarding governments, but he knew when he was outmatched. "We'll see, ma petite," he said finally. "For now, he can certainly stay for dinner." Dinner at the Delacour household was unlike anything Harry had ever experienced. The dining room was elegant without being intimidating, with large windows overlooking gardens that seemed to glow in the evening light. The table was set with fine china and crystal that sparkled, but the atmosphere was warm and informal. Harry sat awkwardly in clothes that had been hastily adjusted to fit him, a soft blue shirt and trousers that felt impossibly comfortable after Dudley's cast-offs. His damp hair had been gently dried and combed by Lizette, who had exclaimed over his poor bones showing, and promised to fix this right away, young monsieur. "Do you like coco vin, Harry?" Sebastian asked as Lizette served the main course. Harry stared at the delicious-smelling dish, having no idea what it was but not wanting to appear rude. "I've never had it, sir." "It's chicken," Fleur informed him with the slight superiority of an older child. With wine sauce. It's Papa's favorite. You don't have to call me, sir, Sebastian said gently. Sebastian is fine. And please, eat as much as you like. Harry took a cautious bite and couldn't help the small sound of appreciation that escaped him. It was the most delicious thing he'd ever tasted. Gabrielle, seated beside him, beamed. See. I told you our food is the best. Much better than British food. Gabrielle, Apollon admonished gently. But you always say British cuisine is an affront to magic itself, Maman, Gabrielle replied innocently. Sebastian coughed to hide his laughter while Apollon looked both amused and embarrassed. Perhaps I've been a bit harsh in my assessments, she admitted. Harry, would you like to tell us a little about yourself? About how you came to be in France? Harry tensed, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Would they send him back if they knew he'd run away? But they already knew that, didn't they? Apollon had found him in a ditch, after all. I lived with my aunt and uncle, he began hesitantly. They don't like magic. When weird things happened around me, they'd get angry. Really angry. He looked down at his plate. Last week, I turned my teacher's wig blue. I didn't mean to, but Uncle Vernon. He trailed off, not wanting to say more. Not wanting to remember the belt, the cupboard, the hunger. You don't have to continue if you don't want to, Sebastian said quietly. I ran away, Harry continued, feeling he owed them this much for their kindness. I hid on a truck, then a ferry. I just wanted to go somewhere far away. And how did you know to come to France specifically? Sebastian asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Harry shrugged. I heard the weatherman say the ferries to France were running. It seemed right. Something passed between Sebastian and Apollon, a look of shared concern. Harry, Apollon said gently, do you know about the magical world? About witches and wizards? Harry shook his head. Uncle Vernon said magic isn't real. But I knew that wasn't true. I can make things happen sometimes. Your aunt and uncle, they never told you about your parents. About who you are. They said my parents died in a car crash. That's how I got this. He pushed up his fringe to reveal the lightning scar. Aunt Petunia said they were worthless. That my dad was unemployed and my mum was stupid for marrying him. Apollon's hand tightened on her wine glass until Sebastian gently touched her wrist. The crystal had begun to vibrate with her anger. That's not true, Harry, Sebastian said firmly. Your parents were brave magical people who died protecting you from a very dark wizard. Harry's eyes widened. Magical? They were, like me. Yes. James Potter was what we call a pure blood, from a long line of wizards. Lily Potter was Muggle-born, born to non-magical parents but a powerful witch in her own right. They were both highly respected. How do you know that? Harry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because your parents were famous in our world, Apollon explained. As are you, Harry. You're known as the boy who lived. As gently as they could, the Delacours explained to Harry about Voldemort, the war that had gripped magical Britain, and how his parents had died protecting him. They told him how somehow, inexplicably, he had survived the killing curse, deflecting it back to Voldemort and ending his reign of terror. Everyone in the magical world knows your name, Sebastian concluded. Which is partly why your presence here is complicated. Harry looked stunned, his food forgotten. People know who I am. But I'm just Harry. You're much more than just Harry, Fleur said, speaking up for the first time in a while. You're a hero. I don't feel like a hero, Harry said quietly. Heroes rarely do, Sebastian replied. But it does leave us with a dilemma. You were placed with your aunt and uncle for a reason, Harry. There are people in Britain who will be looking for you, people who believe they know what's best for you. You're going to send me back, Harry said flatly, his brief moment of wonder collapsing into resignation. "No," Apollon said firmly, shooting her husband a warning look. "We are not sending you back to people who hurt you. But we do need to decide what happens next." "He should stay here," Gabrielle announced, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "We have lots of room." "It's not that simple, ma petite," Sebastian began. "Why not?" Apollon challenged, surprising him. "Why isn't it that simple?" "Apollon, you know why. The diplomatic implications alone. I'm not talking about diplomacy, Sebastian. I'm talking about a child. A magical child who has been mistreated by the very people who should have protected him. And if Dumbledore discovers we've taken him? If the British ministry accuses us of kidnapping their national hero? Then we face those consequences," Apollon said firmly. "But I will not send him back to abuse." Harry watched this exchange with growing anxiety. He'd caused trouble again, just by existing. Maybe it would be better if he just left now, before they started fighting because of him. As if sensing his thoughts, Gabrielle slipped her small hand into his under the table and squeezed. "Don't worry," she whispered. "Maman always wins these arguments." Sure enough, Sebastian's expression softened as he looked at Harry's worried face. "Perhaps," he conceded, "we could offer temporary sanctuary while we investigate the situation more thoroughly. See if there are other options in Britain, other relatives perhaps, or a more suitable guardian." "And if there aren't?" Apollon pressed. Sebastian sighed. "Then we'll face that when we come to it." Harry hardly dared to breathe. Were they really considering letting him stay? No one had ever stood up for him before, let alone against important people like the ones they were talking about. "For now," Sebastian continued, addressing Harry directly, "consider yourself our guest, Harry. We'll sort out the rest later." "Thank you, sir, Sebastian," Harry said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't fully understand. "Excellent," Gabrielle declared, beaming at Harry. "Now you can try the crème brûlée. It's the best part." The weeks that followed were the strangest and most wonderful of Harry's young life. The Delacours had given him a bedroom larger than the Dursleys' entire first floor, with a canopied bed and windows that opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. For the first few nights, he'd found himself sleeping on the floor beside the bed, unable to believe such luxury could really be for him. Lizette had taken it upon herself to "put some meat on those bones," as she put it, appearing regularly with trays of pastries and fruits, encouraging him to take seconds and thirds at meals. Within a month, Harry's face had lost its pinched look, and he'd grown almost an inch. More remarkable than the physical comforts were the people. Sebastian, despite his initial reservations, took time each evening to tell Harry stories about the magical world, explaining about the different wizarding schools, magical governments, and the various magical creatures that most muggles believed were mere myths. Apollon had begun teaching Harry basic magical theory, delighted by his quick understanding and natural aptitude. "Most children don't show such control at your age," she told him after he'd successfully made a feather float on command without a wand. "You have remarkable potential, Harry." Fleur remained somewhat aloof at first, watching Harry with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. At 8, she was already showing signs of her Vila heritage, a fact Harry learned when she'd become angry at him for accidentally knocking over her potion ingredients, and her eyes had flashed silver while her hair seemed to crackle with energy. "Sorry about that," Sebastian had explained later. "Vila blood runs strong in Apollon's family. The girls are only part Vila, but the temperament comes through quite clearly, especially in moments of strong emotion." "What's a Vila?" Harry had asked. "Magical beings of great beauty and power," Sebastian explained. "They can entrance men with a glance and throw fireballs when angered. They're quite common in France and Eastern Europe, less so in Britain." Harry had nodded thoughtfully. "That explains why Fleur's hair looked like it was on fire when I spilled her potion." Sebastian had laughed. "Indeed. Don't worry, she'll warm up to you. Fleur's protective of her family, that's all." She's not sure where you fit yet. Gabrielle, on the other hand, had adopted Harry immediately. At 4, she followed him everywhere, peppering him with questions about England and teaching him French words with the determined patience of a born instructor. Non, Harry, she would say, her tiny face serious. It's not mercy. It's merci. Again. By the end of the first month, Harry could understand basic French phrases and was beginning to respond in kind, much to Gabrielle's delight. It was during this time that Sebastian was forced to address the diplomatic situation. British magical newspapers had begun reporting on Harry Potter's disappearance, with headlines declaring, "Boy who lived missing," and, "Dumbledore assures, Potter safe but hidden." "Dumbledore knows you're gone," Sebastian told Harry one evening, showing him the French translation of the Daily Prophet. "But he's not admitting it publicly. He's telling everyone it's a planned relocation for your safety." "Why would he do that?" Harry asked, studying the moving photograph of an old wizard with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles. "Politics," Sebastian said simply. "Admitting he's lost track of you would cause panic and undermine confidence in his leadership. But make no mistake, he's looking for you, as is the British ministry." "Will they find me here?" Sebastian hesitated. "We've taken precautions. The estate is under the Fidelius charm now, with Apollon as secret keeper. Unless she specifically reveals your presence here, no one can find you." Harry nodded, only partially understanding but trusting Sebastian's confidence. "However," Sebastian continued, "I've had to make certain diplomatic maneuvers to avoid suspicion. My position requires regular contact with the British ministry, and questions would be raised if I suddenly became reclusive." "What kind of maneuvers?" Sebastian smiled slightly. "I may have let slip to certain parties that I've heard rumors of unusual magical activity in southern Italy. And I might have expressed concern about reports of a dark-haired British boy seen near Sicily." Harry grinned. "You're sending them in the wrong direction." "Merely sharing diplomatic concerns between friendly nations," Sebastian said with feigned innocence. "Meanwhile, my contacts are watching for any sign of who might have placed you with those muggles and why. There's more to this situation than meets the eye, Harry. Someone powerful wanted you raised away from the magical world, isolated and unaware of your heritage." "Dumbledore?" Harry asked, recalling the name that came up so often in these discussions. "Perhaps. His motives are often obscure, even to those who know him well." Sebastian looked troubled. "He's not an evil man, quite the contrary. But he takes a long view of events, sometimes at the expense of individual happiness." "Do you think he knew about how the Dursleys treated me?" Sebastian's expression darkened. "I don't know. I hope not. But either way, we'll find answers before making any decisions about your future." Harry nodded, feeling a now familiar surge of gratitude toward this family who had taken him in without hesitation. In just 1 month, they had given him more care and consideration than the Dursleys had in 5 years. "Now," Sebastian said, his tone lightening, "I believe Apollon wanted to see how you're progressing with those levitation exercises. She mentioned something about moving on to color-changing charms if you've mastered it." Harry jumped up eagerly. Magic lessons with Apollon had quickly become his favorite part of the day. Not all was perfect in Harry's new life, however. As summer turned to autumn, tensions arose from an unexpected source. The Levesque family, old rivals of the Delacours in French magical politics, had begun to take an interest in Sebastian's recent diplomatic activities. Claude Levesque, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, had made several pointed inquiries about Sebastian's concerns regarding magical activity in Italy. During a ministry function that Sebastian couldn't avoid attending, Claude had cornered him near the refreshments. "Fascinating, these reports from Sicily," Claude had said, his thin smile not reaching his eyes. "And yet my department has received no official confirmation. One might almost think you were misdirecting attention, mon ami." Sebastian had maintained his diplomatic composure, but the encounter left him uneasy. The Levesques had long aligned themselves with British magical interests, in opposition to the Delacours' more Franco-centric policies. If they suspected Harry's presence, these concerns came to a head on a crisp October day, when Apollon took the children to the magical market in wizard-hidden section of Montmartre. Harry, now conversational in French and with a mild glamour charm disguising his scar, had been looking forward to the outing for weeks. The magical market was everything Harry had imagined and more, stalls selling everything from self-stirring cauldrons to miniature dragons that breathed harmless colored flame. Street performers made objects dance and swoop through the air, while a violinist played a melody that caused small flowers to sprout wherever the notes seemed to land. "Can I get this for Gabrielle?" Harry asked Apollon, pointing to a delicate glass butterfly that flapped its wings and changed colors depending on its owner's mood. He'd been saving the pocket money Sebastian gave him for chores around the estate. "That's very thoughtful, Harry," Apollon said, smiling as Harry carefully counted out the French wizarding currency. Fleur, who had been examining a display of potion ingredients nearby, suddenly tensed. "Maman," she said quietly. "The Levesques are here." Apollon turned casually, her expression revealing nothing as she spotted Elise Levesque and her son Matthew approaching through the crowd. Matthew, at 10, was 2 years older than Fleur and already carried himself with the arrogant assurance of his father. "Madame Delacour," Elise called, her voice carrying the precise diction of upper-class French magical society. "What a pleasant surprise." "Elise," Apollon nodded politely. "Doing some shopping?" Matthew needed new quills for his private magical instruction. Elise's eyes fell on Harry, narrowing slightly. "And who is this? I don't believe we've been introduced." Before Apollon could answer, Gabrielle piped up. "This is Harry. He's living with us now. He's getting me a butterfly." Elise's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "Indeed? How charitable of you, Apollon. Taking in strays." Harry felt his face burn, but Apollon's hand settled protectively on his shoulder. "Not charity, Elise. Family." Apollon's voice remained pleasant, but Harry felt a subtle shift in the air around her, the same energy he'd noticed when Fleur became angry. "Harry is my husband's second cousin's child. He's staying with us while completing his early magical education." The lie rolled off Apollon's tongue with such smoothness that even Harry almost believed it. Matthew was staring at Harry with undisguised suspicion. "He looks British," the boy declared. "His mother was," Apollon replied smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have several more stops to make before lunch." Elise smiled thinly. "Of course. Give my regards to Sebastian. Claude mentioned they had such an interesting conversation recently." As they walked away, Harry noticed Apollon's tight expression. "Who are they?" he whispered. "Political rivals," she replied quietly. "And not people we want taking too much interest in you, Harry. I think we should cut our trip short today." Back at the estate, Sebastian listened to Apollon's account of the encounter with growing concern. "The timing is too coincidental," he said. Claude's questions, now Elise's appearance at the market. "They suspect something. But they can't know who Harry really is," Apollon argued. The glamour charm hit his scar perfectly. "They don't need to know who he is to cause problems. Just the fact that we've taken in a British magical child without official documentation would be enough for them to create diplomatic issues." Harry, listening from the doorway, felt the now familiar sensation of guilt. Once again, he was causing problems for people who had shown him kindness. That night, he found it hard to sleep. What if the Levesques discovered who he really was? What if they told the British ministry, or this Dumbledore person? Would the Delacours get in trouble? Would they decide he wasn't worth the risk after all? A soft knock on his door interrupted his worried thoughts. "Harry? Are you awake?" Gabrielle's small voice called. He opened the door to find her in a white nightgown, clutching a stuffed dragon. "I can't sleep," she announced. "I keep thinking about those mean people at the market. They looked at you like Mère Levesque looks at muddy shoes. Despite his anxiety, Harry smiled at the comparison. I'm fine, Gabby. Can I stay with you for a bit? Just until I get sleepy. Harry hesitated, then nodded, opening the door wider. Gabrielle climbed onto the window seat, curling up like a cat while Harry sat beside her. Fleur says the Levesques are bad people, Gabrielle said, stroking her stuffed dragon's wings. She says their family helped bad wizards in the war. What war? The one where your parents died. Fleur says some French families supported the bad British wizard, the one whose name we don't say. Harry frowned. Voldemort, he whispered. Gabrielle gasped. You're not supposed to say it. It's bad luck. Sorry, Harry said quickly. Sebastian and Apollon didn't tell me that part. They probably didn't want to scare you. Gabrielle yawned. I'm not scared of them, though. Papa says the Levesques are all talk and no magic. Harry smiled again, but his mind was racing. If the Levesques had connections to Voldemort's supporters, did that make them more dangerous? Would they recognize him if they saw his scar? Harry. Gabrielle's voice had grown sleepy. Will you stay with us forever? The simple question caught him off guard. I don't know, Gabby. You should, she mumbled, her eyes drifting closed. You make us better. Especially Fleur. She's nicer when you're here. Harry doubted that was true. Fleur remained coolly polite to him most days, though she'd stopped glaring at him during meals. Gabby, you should go back to your room, he said gently, noticing she was nearly asleep. Too tired, she murmured. Carry me. Sighing, Harry scooped up the small girl. For someone so tiny, she was surprisingly heavy. He padded down the hallway to her room, decorated in pastel blues and silvers with magical stars that twinkled on the ceiling. As he tucked her in, Gabrielle grabbed his hand. Promise you won't leave, Harry, she mumbled, already more asleep than awake. Promise you'll stay with us. Harry hesitated, then squeezed her small hand. I promise I'll try, he whispered. It wasn't until he was back in his own room that he realized he meant it. In just a few months, the Delacours had become more family to him than the Dursleys had ever been. The thought of leaving them, of losing this newfound happiness, made his chest ache. I'll try, he whispered again to the empty room. I'll try not to let anything take this away. Winter descended on the Delacour estate, transforming the gardens into a wonderland of frost and snow. Harry, who had never been allowed to play in the snow at the Dursleys, spent hours outside with Gabrielle, building enchanted snowmen that waved and bowed to passers-by. A bit of magic Apollon had taught him that still delighted him every time it worked. His 6th birthday had come and gone in July, celebrated with more fanfare than he'd known existed, a cake shaped like the Eiffel Tower that actually sparkled, presents wrapped in paper that changed colors when touched, and a small gathering that included Sebastian's most trusted colleagues from the ministry. Christmas approached, and with it came a renewed sense of belonging. The Delacours decorated their home with enchantments rather than physical ornaments, glittering lights that floated near the ceiling, ghostly silver reindeer that pranced through the hallways at night, and a magnificent tree in the main salon that sang carols in harmonizing voices when approached. Harry helped Gabrielle write her letter to Père Noël, the French equivalent of Father Christmas, smiling as she dictated a list that included a real unicorn and flying shoes. You should write one too, she insisted, pushing parchment toward him. I'm too old for that, he protested, though in truth, he'd never been allowed to write to Father Christmas at the Dursleys. You're only 6, Gabrielle countered. And Père Noël always answers French letters first, because French magic is the best magic. Harry laughed. Is that what Fleur told you? No, it's what Maman says. Though Fleur says it too. In the end, Harry wrote a brief letter, feeling slightly foolish but unwilling to disappoint Gabrielle. He asked for only one thing, to stay with the Delacours forever. He didn't show Gabrielle what he'd written, slipping the parchment into the magical sending box that Sebastian had set up for the children's letters. 3 days before Christmas, disaster struck. Sebastian returned home from the ministry early, his face grim. "The Levesques have filed a formal inquiry," he announced to Apollon in the study, unaware that Harry was reading nearby, concealed by the high back of a wingchair. "They're demanding documentation on our British ward and suggesting improper guardianship." Apollon's face paled. "They can't possibly know, they don't need to know he's Harry Potter to cause problems," Sebastian cut in. "The mere fact that we have a British magical child living here unofficially is enough. They're suggesting we've violated international magical child welfare laws. That's absurd. We saved him from abuse." Without reporting it through proper channels, Sebastian pointed out. "Which, I remind you, I advised doing from the beginning. And alert Dumbledore to his location. After he placed Harry with those terrible people." Apollon's voice rose. "Never. We may not have a choice now," Sebastian said heavily. "Claude has connections in the British ministry. If this inquiry proceeds, they'll demand to interview Harry, verify his identity. Then we must ensure it doesn't proceed," Apollon said, her voice hardening. "What do the Levesques want?" "There must be something." Sebastian sighed. "Claude hinted that if I were to support his proposal for restricting non-human magical beings' employment rights, the inquiry might lose momentum." "Restrict?" Apollon's voice shook with anger. "He wants you to support legislation that would affect Vila, werewolves, even part giants." "Sebastian, you cannot." "I know," he said quietly. "Which leaves us with limited options." Harry sat frozen in his hiding place, his heart pounding painfully. It was happening again. Because of him, the Delacours were facing trouble, serious trouble that could affect Sebastian's career, their standing in magical society, perhaps even their safety. He slipped out of the study while they continued to argue, his mind racing. Perhaps he should leave, remove the problem entirely. But where would he go? Back to Britain. The thought of returning to the Dursleys made him physically ill. Lost in these thoughts, he nearly collided with Fleur in the hallway. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, then paused, noticing his expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Harry mumbled, trying to move past her. Fleur caught his arm. At 8, she was still significantly taller than him, and her grip was surprisingly strong. "You're lying," she said bluntly. "You look like you're about to cry." "I'm not," Harry protested, though his eyes did feel suspiciously hot. I heard your parents talking. About me. About the trouble I'm causing." Fleur's expression shifted from irritation to something more complex. "The Levesques?" Harry nodded, surprised she knew. "They've filed some kind of inquiry. About me being here." Fleur released his arm, her young face suddenly serious beyond her years. "Come with me," she said, heading toward the small sitting room the children used for games. Once there, she closed the door and faced him. "The Levesques have always tried to hurt our family," she said matter-of-factly. "Before you came, they tried to pass laws restricting Vila rights. That would have affected Maman, me, Gabrielle, all of us. Papa stopped them. But now they're using me to attack your family," Harry said miserably. "They're using you as an excuse," Fleur corrected. "There's a difference. If it wasn't you, they would find something else." Harry wasn't sure he believed her, but he appreciated the attempt to make him feel better. It was the kindest Fleur had been to him since his arrival. "I could leave," he said, voicing the thought that had been growing in his mind. "Go back to Britain. Then they'd have no reason to." "Don't be stupid," Fleur cut him off. "If you go back to Britain, either those horrible muggles get you, or the British ministry does, or that Dumbledore person Papa doesn't trust. Besides," she added with surprising fierceness, "Gabrielle would never forgive any of us if you disappeared. But what can I do? I'm just a kid." Fleur looked thoughtful. "Maybe nothing directly. But Papa always says information is power. If we knew what the Levesques were really after, or if we had something to use against them. Like what? I don't know. But Matthew Levesque is always boasting about his family's importance. Maybe he knows something useful. Harry frowned. How would we find out? It's not like he'd tell us anything. A small, mischievous smile appeared on Fleur's face, an expression Harry had never seen on her before. No, but he might tell someone he was trying to impress. Someone with Vila charm. You? Harry asked, surprised. Fleur nodded. There's a holiday reception at the ministry tomorrow night. Families are invited. I've seen how Matthew looks at me when he thinks no one is watching. He's stupid that way, like most boys. She shot Harry a look that excluded him from this generalization, much to his relief. What about me? I can't go to the ministry, someone might recognize me. No, Fleur agreed. But you can help me prepare. I need to know what questions to ask, what information would be useful. For the first time since overhearing Sebastian and Apollin's conversation, Harry felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than sitting around waiting for disaster to strike. Okay, he said. Let's think about what we need to know. The following evening, Harry paced nervously in the children's sitting room while Gabrielle watched him with wide eyes. Fleur looks pretty, she announced. Maman did her hair with silver ribbons. That's good, Harry said absently. Did she remember the questions we came up with? Gabrielle nodded solemnly. She practiced them all morning. She said Matthew is too stupid to notice if she asks the same thing different ways. Despite his anxiety, Harry smiled. Working with Fleur on this small act of espionage had changed something between them. For the first time, she was treating him like an ally rather than an intruder. They'd spent hours the previous day crafting questions that seemed innocent but might yield useful information, with Fleur practicing different ways of using her nascent Vila charm to appear interested in Matthew's answers. Harry, Gabrielle said suddenly, if you had to leave, would you take me with you? The question caught him off guard. What? No, Gabby, I couldn't do that. Your parents would be heartbroken. But I'd be heartbroken if you left, she said with a child's simple logic. So someone has to be sad. Harry sat beside her on the small sofa. No one's leaving yet, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Fleur's plan might work. And if it doesn't? Harry hesitated. Then we'll think of something else. Your papa is smart, and your maman is fierce. They won't give up easily. Gabrielle seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to playing with her enchanted doll house, where tiny magical figures moved from room to room, acting out domestic scenes. Harry continued his anxious pacing, watching the ornate clock on the mantel as the hours ticked by. It was nearly 11 when they heard the sound of the family returning. Harry rushed to the entrance hall, Gabrielle at his heels. Sebastian looked tired but not defeated, while Apollon appeared coolly composed. Fleur, however, was practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. How was the reception? Harry asked, trying to sound casual. Boring, Gabrielle declared before anyone could answer. They're always boring. Did you bring me a cake? In the kitchen with Lisette, Apollon said with a small smile. Just one piece before bed, mind you. Gabrielle dashed off, leaving Harry looking questioningly at Fleur, who gave him a tiny nod. Harry, perhaps you could help Fleur hang up her cloak, Apollon suggested, with a knowing look that made Harry wonder if she suspected their plan. Once alone in the cloakroom, Fleur burst into whispered explanation. It worked. Matthew is even more of an idiot than I thought. He was showing off the whole time, trying to impress me with how important his family is. Did he say anything useful? Harry asked eagerly. Fleur's eyes glittered. Better than useful. He told me his father has been working with someone from the British ministry, someone who's specifically interested in finding you. Harry's stomach dropped. Who? He didn't say a name, but he said this person offered a significant reward for information leading to Harry Potter's whereabouts. And there's more, the Levesques don't actually care about magical child welfare laws. The whole inquiry is a distraction, to keep Papa busy while they investigate our family. Investigate? For what? For signs of you. Fleur's voice dropped even lower. Matthew says his father believes sheltering you would give our family significant political leverage with the British. He wants that leverage for himself. Harry processed this information. So they don't actually know I'm here. They just suspect. Yes, but they're looking for proof. Matthew said his father hired a private investigator to watch our estate, but they can't get past the protective enchantments. Relief flooded Harry. The Fidelius charm was working, no one could find him unless Apollon, as secret keeper, revealed his presence. There's one more thing, Fleur added, her expression turning serious. Matthew mentioned a name I recognized from Papa's discussions about Britain. Lucius Malfoy. He said Monsieur Malfoy is particularly interested in finding you and has his own reasons separate from the Ministry's official search. Harry frowned. Who's Lucius Malfoy? I don't know exactly, but Papa once called him Voldemort's puppet who avoided Azkaban, whatever that means. Harry's blood ran cold. If this Malfoy person had connections to Voldemort, and was specifically looking for him. We need to tell your parents, he said urgently. Fleur nodded. I think they already suspect something like this, but my information will help confirm it. They found the adults in Sebastian's study, heads bent over what looked like legal documents. Both looked up when the children entered, Apollon's expression softening at the sight of them. You two should be in bed, she said, though without much conviction. We need to tell you something, Fleur announced. About the Levesques. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. And what would you know about the Levesques' current activities, young lady? Fleur straightened, looking remarkably like her mother in that moment. I spoke with Matthew at the reception tonight. He told me things his father probably wouldn't want us to know. The adults exchanged a look that mingled surprise and reluctant admiration. Did you now? Sebastian said, setting aside the documents. And was this conversation spontaneous, or planned? Planned, Harry admitted. It was my fault, sir. I overheard you and Apollon talking yesterday about the inquiry, and I was worried. Fleur thought Matthew might reveal something useful if she seemed interested in his family's importance. Instead of the reprimand Harry expected, Sebastian looked thoughtful. That shows initiative, if not necessarily good judgment. What did you learn? Fleur recounted everything Matthew had told her, including the British connection and the name Lucius Malfoy. As she spoke, Sebastian's expression grew increasingly grave, while Apollon's eyes flashed with that dangerous veil of fire. This confirms our suspicions, Sebastian said when she'd finished. The inquiry is a feint, designed to distract us while they gather evidence of Harry's presence. Who is Lucius Malfoy? Harry asked. Why is he looking for me specifically? The adults exchanged another look before Apollon answered. Lucius Malfoy was a prominent supporter of Voldemort during the Wizarding War, she explained gently. He claimed afterward that he had been under the Imperious Curse, a spell that controls the victim's actions, but many doubted this. He wants to hurt me? Harry asked, his voice small despite his efforts to sound brave. We don't know his intentions, Sebastian said carefully. But we would be foolish to assume they're benevolent. If Malfoy is working with the Levesques, that adds a concerning dimension to this situation. What are we going to do? Fleur asked, unconsciously including herself in the adults' deliberations. Sebastian sighed. For now, we maintain our position. The inquiry itself is on shaky legal ground, especially now that we know its true purpose. I can use diplomatic channels to delay and complicate matters. And Malfoy? Apollon pressed. If he's operating through official British ministry channels, that's one challenge. If he's working privately with the Levesques, that's potentially more dangerous but also more actionable. A cold smile touched Sebastian's lips. Claude Levesque should know better than to conduct unofficial foreign policy, especially with a family of questionable allegiance during the war. Harry looked between the adults, trying to follow the political maneuvering. "Does this mean I can stay?" he asked, the question that mattered most to him. Apollone's expression softened. She crossed the room and knelt before him, taking his small hands in hers. "Harry, from the moment I found you in that ditch, you became part of this family. We will not allow anyone, not the Levesques, not Lucius Malfoy, not even Albus Dumbledore himself, to take you from us against your will. Do you understand?" Harry nodded, a lump forming in his throat. No one had ever fought for him before. No one had ever put themselves at risk to protect him, at least, no one he could remember. "Good," Apollon said, rising gracefully. "Now, both of you should get some sleep. We have planning to do, and you've already proven yourselves useful allies." As Harry and Fleur left the study, he felt her hand briefly touch his shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that he nearly stopped walking. "We did good," she said simply. "You're not as useless as I thought." Coming from Fleur, this was high praise indeed. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight glinting off the snow-covered grounds of the Delacour estate. Despite the tensions of recent days, a festive mood had settled over the household. Gabrielle woke everyone at dawn, bouncing excitedly from room to room in her nightgown, insisting that Père Noël had visited and they must come see immediately. Harry, who had slept poorly, thinking about Lucius Malfoy and what his interest might mean, found himself smiling despite his worries as he followed an exuberant Gabrielle down to the main salon where the singing Christmas tree stood surrounded by presents. "Look, Harry!" she exclaimed, pointing to the colorful packages. "That big one has your name on it." Sure enough, a large rectangular package wrapped in paper that shimmered like captured starlight bore a tag with his name. Harry stared at it in amazement. Even after months with the Delacours, he still found it startling to be included so completely in family occasions. Sebastian and Apollon appeared, both in elegant dressing gowns, looking tired but happy. Fleur followed, her hair tousled from sleep but her eyes alert. "Happy Christmas, everyone," Sebastian said, summoning hot chocolate for the children and coffee for the adults with a casual wave of his wand. "I see Père Noël found us despite our protective enchantments." "Magic recognizes magic," Gabrielle said with authority, making the adults chuckle. "Indeed it does, ma petite," Apollon agreed. "Now, shall we see what he brought?" The next hour passed in a blur of torn wrapping paper and exclamations of delight. Gabrielle received her requested flying shoes, enchanted to hover only a few inches off the ground, much to her initial disappointment, while Fleur unwrapped elegant new robes and advanced magical theory books that made her eyes light up. When it came time for Harry to open his large package, he did so with careful, almost reverent movements, savoring the moment. Inside was a child-sized broomstick, gleaming with polish and thrumming with magical energy. "A clean sweep 5, Sebastian explained as Harry stared at it in awe. "Charmed with additional safety features, of course, but otherwise a proper wizarding broomstick. I thought it was time you learned to fly." "All wizarding children should learn to fly," Fleur added, for once without her usual competitive edge. "You'll enjoy it, Harry. It's freedom like nothing else." "Thank you," Harry managed, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't. I never." "You're very welcome, dear one," Apollon said gently, saving him from struggling for words. "Perhaps after breakfast, Sebastian can give you your first lesson." Harry nodded, still staring at the broom. At the Dursleys, Christmas had meant watching Dudley open mountains of presents while he received, at best, a pair of old socks or a coat hanger. The contrast between then and now was so vast that it made his chest ache. The moment was interrupted by a sharp crack as a house elf appeared, not Lizette, but Topher, the more formal elf who assisted Sebastian with ministry matters. "Forgive the intrusion, Master Sebastian," Topher said with a deep bow, "but an urgent message has arrived from the ministry." It is marked as requiring immediate attention. Sebastian frowned, setting aside his coffee cup. On Christmas morning? It must be serious indeed. He took the sealed envelope from Topher, breaking the magical wax seal that glowed briefly before allowing the letter to be opened. As Sebastian read, his expression darkened. "What is it?" Apollon asked, tension evident in her voice. "Claude Levesque has accelerated the inquiry," Sebastian said grimly. "He's demanding a home inspection, today." Today? On Christmas? Apollon's outrage was evident. "That's outrageous, even for Claude. He claims to have received credible intelligence that we are harboring Harry Potter against the wishes of his legal British guardians, and that the matter cannot wait." Harry felt the happiness of moments before drain away. "It's my fault," he said quietly. "Maybe I should, you should finish opening your presents," Sebastian interrupted firmly. "This is a political maneuver, nothing more. Claude is hoping to catch us off guard, to find evidence of your presence before we can prepare." "But I am here," Harry pointed out. "Won't they find me?" Sebastian and Apollon exchanged a look that Harry had come to recognize. They were silently deciding how much to explain to the children. "Harry," Apollon said gently, "do you remember when I explained about the Fidelius charm protecting our home?" Harry nodded. "You're the secret keeper. No one can find me unless you tell them I'm here." "Exactly. Even if Claude Levesque and a dozen ministry officials walked through this very room, they would not see you unless I had specifically revealed your presence to them." "Really?" Harry's eyes widened. "They wouldn't see me at all. They would see a different version of reality," Sebastian explained. "One in which you simply don't exist. Your presence would appear to belong to others, your room would seem to be a guest room or storage space, and any mention of you in conversation would slip from their minds immediately." "It's very powerful magic," Fleur added, looking impressed despite herself. "One of the most complex protective charms. Maman is exceptional with protection spells." Apollon smiled at her daughter's compliment. "Thank you, Sherry. Now, I suggest we continue our Christmas morning while Sebastian deals with this interruption. There's nothing Claude can discover, no matter how hard he searches." Sebastian nodded, rising from his seat. "I'll send a response accepting the inspection but expressing my profound disappointment at Claude's timing. That should buy us a few hours at least." As Sebastian left to compose his reply, Harry looked at the remaining presents under the tree, his enthusiasm dampened by worry. "Hey," Fleur said, nudging him with her foot. "Don't let the Levesques ruin Christmas. That's exactly what they want." "Fleur's right," Gabrielle declared, pushing another package toward Harry. "This one's from me. Open it." Harry managed a smile and unwrapped Gabrielle's gift, a hand-drawn picture book titled Harry's Adventures in France, featuring crude but charming illustrations of himself doing various magical activities with the Delacour family. The last page showed all five of them standing together, holding hands, with the words, "My family," written in Gabrielle's wobbly handwriting. "Do you like it?" she asked anxiously. "Fleur helped with the binding spell, but I did all the drawings myself. It's the best present I've ever gotten," Harry said honestly, and was rewarded with Gabrielle's beaming smile. The remainder of the morning passed with forced normality, though Harry noticed Apollon disappearing periodically to confer with Sebastian. After breakfast, instead of the promised flying lesson, Sebastian suggested they all remain indoors. "The ministry officials will be here at 2 o'clock, he explained. "While they won't see Harry, it's still best if we minimize complications. Perhaps board games in the library?" Harry tried to enjoy the magical chess set he'd received from Sebastian, where the pieces moved on their own and offered sarcastic advice to the players, but his mind kept returning to the impending inspection. What if the Fidelius charm failed somehow? What if these officials had a way to detect him that the Delacours hadn't anticipated? Shortly before 2, Sebastian gathered everyone in the library. "The ministry delegation will be arriving soon," he said. "I want you all to remain calm and act normally. Harry, you should know that while they cannot see you directly, they might notice if objects move seemingly on their own, or if doors open without apparent cause. So I should stay still? Harry asked. Not necessarily. Just be mindful. To us, you'll appear exactly as you are. To them, if they notice anything at all, it would seem like a momentary oddity, quickly forgotten. It's quite fascinating from a magical theory perspective, Fleur commented. The charm doesn't just hide you, it alters the perception of reality for those not included in the secret. Harry nodded, though the theoretical aspects interested him less than the practical question of whether he'd be discovered. At precisely 2 o'clock, the magical chime at the estate's entrance announced visitors. Sebastian straightened his robes and went to greet them, his diplomatic mask firmly in place. Through the library window, Harry saw Claude Levesque leading a group of 4 officials up the path to the house. Claude was a tall, thin man with a pointed beard and cold eyes, dressed in formal ministry robes of dark blue. Behind him came a younger man who bore a striking resemblance, clearly his son, though older than Matthew, and 3 others in the distinctive uniforms of magical law enforcement. That's Jean-Paul Levesque, Fleur whispered, following Harry's gaze. Claude's eldest son. He works in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Papa says he's more dangerous than Claude because he actually believes in the pureblood superiority nonsense they espouse. Harry nodded, filing away this information. The Delacours had been teaching him to recognize the signs of pureblood ideology, the same toxic beliefs that had fueled Voldemort's rise in Britain. According to Sebastian, similar beliefs existed in France, though they were less violently expressed. From the entrance hall came the sound of formal greetings, Claude's oily voice carrying clearly, "Sebastian, my old friend. My sincere apologies for the timing, but duty to magical security cannot wait, even for holidays." "Of course, Claude," Sebastian's voice replied smoothly. "Though I confess I'm puzzled by the urgency. Perhaps you could explain exactly what credible intelligence prompted this inspection." "All in good time. First, I must complete the formalities. These are my colleagues from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, here to observe and record." Footsteps approached the library. Harry tensed, but Apollon laid a calming hand on his shoulder. "Remember," she murmured, "they cannot see you." The library door opened, and Claude Levesque entered, followed by his entourage. His cold eyes swept the room, passing over Harry without a flicker of recognition, though they narrowed slightly at the sight of the chess set with its pieces still arranged mid-game. "Ah, the family gathered for Christmas," Claude said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "How delightful. And your lovely daughters, of course. Good day, Mademoiselle Fleur, Mademoiselle Gabrielle." Fleur inclined her head coolly while Gabrielle, for once, remained silent, watching the visitors with uncharacteristic wariness. "As I was explaining to your husband," Claude continued, addressing Apollon, "we have received information suggesting an unauthorized foreign magical minor may be residing at this estate. A rather significant breach of international magical law, if true." "Indeed it would be," Apollon replied calmly. "Though I confess I'm curious about the source of this information." Claude smiled thinly. "A concerned citizen. Now, if you don't mind, we are authorized to inspect the premises." "By all means," Sebastian said, gesturing expansively. "Though I would appreciate accompanying you during this inspection." "Of course," Claude agreed, though his expression suggested he'd prefer otherwise. For the next hour, Harry watched in fascinated tension as the officials methodically moved through the house, examining rooms, opening closets, and occasionally casting detection spells that made the air shimmer briefly. True to Sebastian's explanation, they showed no awareness of Harry's presence, even when he deliberately stood directly in their path, forcing them to walk around him without conscious awareness of doing so. The most unnerving moment came when they inspected his bedroom. To Harry, it was clearly his space, his clothes in the wardrobe, his books on the shelf, the toy soldier from his cupboard days sitting on the bedside table. But the officials saw something entirely different. "Another guest room," Jean-Paul Levesque commented, making notes on a piece of parchment. Unoccupied. We maintain several guest rooms, Sebastian explained. For diplomatic visitors. Claude ran his finger along the shelf holding Harry's books, his eyes passing over titles like Beginning Magic for Young Wizards and French for Magical Children, without reaction. Quite a collection of children's literature in your guest room, he observed. For visiting families, Apollon replied smoothly. We often host international delegations with children. Claude nodded, though his expression remained suspicious. It was clear he sensed something amiss but couldn't quite identify what. The inspection continued until every room had been examined. Finally, the delegation reconvened in the entrance hall. Well, Sebastian, Claude said, a note of frustration evident in his voice, it appears our information was incomplete. We find no evidence of an unauthorized minor on the premises. As I assured you from the beginning, Sebastian replied pleasantly. Perhaps your source was mistaken. Or perhaps, he added with just a touch of edge, they had motivations beyond simple concern for magical law enforcement. Claude's eyes narrowed. Meaning? Merely that false reports waste valuable ministry resources, Claude. Resources that could be better spent on actual threats to magical security. A tense silence followed this exchange, broken only when Apollon stepped forward. Gentlemen, she said graciously, since you've disrupted our Christmas celebration for this unnecessary inspection, perhaps you would care to join us for a holiday toast before departing? A gesture of continued goodwill between our families, despite this misunderstanding. The subtle emphasis on the last word made Claude's jaw tighten, but diplomatic protocol prevented him from declining such an offer without appearing petty. A splendid idea, Sebastian agreed, summoning Topher with a casual wave. Our finest elf-made wine, I think. A vintage worthy of such distinguished visitors. The forced civility of the following half-hour was almost comical to Harry, who stood in the corner of the salon watching Claude Levesque struggle to maintain his dignity while clearly seething with frustration. The Delacours, by contrast, were the picture of elegant hospitality, offering seasonal pleasantries as if the inspection had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience rather than a deliberate attempt to expose them. When the delegation finally departed, Harry felt the tension he'd been carrying all afternoon release in a rush, leaving him oddly lightheaded. That, Sebastian declared once the visitors were beyond the property wards, was an illuminating experience. They knew something was wrong, Fleur observed. They could feel it, but they couldn't see it. The Fidelius charm is designed that way, Apollon explained. It creates a sort of magical blind spot. Those not in on the secret can sense that something is missing from their perception, but they can't identify what it is. Will they come back? Harry asked anxiously. Sebastian sighed, pouring himself a more generous glass of the elf-made wine. Almost certainly. Claude is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. But he'll be more careful next time, more strategic. And we'll be better prepared, Apollon added firmly. This was a useful test of our protections, if nothing else. Can we have our Christmas back now? Gabrielle asked plaintively. Harry still hasn't tried his new broom. Sebastian laughed, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. Yes, ma petite. Let's reclaim our holiday. Harry's flying lesson is long overdue. And so, as the winter afternoon waned into evening, Harry found himself in the snow-covered gardens, learning the basics of broomstick flight under Sebastian's patient instruction. The fear and tension of the inspection faded as he experienced, for the first time, the exhilarating freedom of rising above the ground on his very own broom. You're a natural. Sebastian called as Harry completed a careful turn without wobbling. Just like your father, from what I've heard. My father flew? Harry asked eagerly, hovering a few feet off the ground. James Potter was a legendary Quidditch player at Hogwarts, Sebastian confirmed. One of the best chasers the school had seen in decades, according to my British counterparts. This new piece of information about his parents, his father specifically, filled Harry with a warm glow that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of flying. With each passing month, the Delacours gave him more than just a home and protection, they were giving him back the history that the Dursleys had tried to erase. As darkness fell and enchanted lanterns illuminated the garden paths, Harry took one final, sweeping flight around the estate's perimeter. Below, he could see the Delacour family watching, Sebastian with arms crossed in satisfaction, Apollon with maternal concern, Fleur with reluctant admiration, and Gabrielle jumping up and down in excitement. His family. Not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice. Claude Levesque and his ministry officials might return. Lucius Malfoy might continue searching for him. Dumbledore and the British magical authorities might never stop looking for their missing savior. But in this moment, soaring above the grounds of his new home, Harry felt something he'd never experienced before, he felt invincible. Winter melted into spring, and with it came Harry's 7th month with the Delacours. The failed Christmas inspection had resulted in a temporary retreat by the Levesques, but Sebastian warned that it was merely a tactical withdrawal. Claude is regrouping, he explained to Harry one evening during their now regular chess matches. Gathering more substantial evidence, probably, or seeking higher authorization for a more invasive search. But the Fidelius charm will still protect me, right? Harry asked, watching his knight demolish Sebastian's bishop with somewhat excessive violence. Yes, though no magical protection is absolutely perfect. The more pressure applied, the more we must be vigilant. Sebastian studied the board thoughtfully. Much like chess, politics requires thinking several moves ahead. Claude's next attack will come from an unexpected direction. This prediction proved accurate in late March, when Sebastian returned from the ministry with troubling news. The British magical government had formally requested assistance in locating Harry Potter, citing concerns about his health and well-being after an extended absence from his registered residence. They're being quite clever about it, Sebastian told Apollon while Harry listened from his now habitual hiding spot in the study. No accusations, no demands, just a humanitarian request that no reasonable government could refuse. And Claude is handling this request, I assume? Apollon asked. Naturally. As head of international cooperation, it falls directly within his purview. He's proposed a nationwide magical trace, a monitoring network designed to detect Harry's specific magical signature if he performs accidental magic anywhere in France. Apollon paled. That would bypass the Fidelius charm entirely. The charm conceals his physical presence, not his magical emanations. Precisely, Sebastian agreed grimly. And given Harry's growing power and the frequency of his accidental magic. Harry recalled the incident just last week when he'd accidentally turned all the water in the decorative fountain to sparkling apple juice after Gabrielle complained of being thirsty during their outdoor lessons. Apollon had been impressed by the complexity of the transfiguration, even as she helped reverse it. What can we do? Apollon asked, her voice tense. I've managed to delay the implementation by raising concerns about the scope of the trace, arguing that it infringes on France's magical sovereignty to allow foreign-designed detection spells to be cast over our entire nation. But it's a temporary measure at best. Harry slipped away before hearing the rest of their conversation, his mind racing. Once again, he was bringing danger to the Delacour's door. Despite their protection, despite the Fidelius charm, his mere presence was becoming increasingly problematic. He found Fleur in the library, working on her advanced transfiguration exercises. At 9, she was already studying magic at a level most children didn't attempt until they began formal schooling at 11. The Levesques are trying again, he announced without preamble. Something about a magical trace that could detect me even with the Fidelius charm. Fleur looked up from her book, her expression serious. That makes sense. The charm hides your physical presence, not your magical essence. Your father seems worried. He should be. A nationwide trace would require ministry resources and approval at the highest levels. If Claude Levesque gets that kind of authorization. She trailed off, looking troubled. Maybe I should stop doing magic, Harry suggested. If I don't use it, they can't trace it, right? Fleur shook her head. That's not how it works. Especially not for someone like you. What do you mean, someone like me? Fleur gave him an evaluating look, as if deciding how much to share. Haven't you noticed that you do more accidental magic than anyone else in this house? More than me, more than Gabrielle, even though we're part Vila and should have stronger magical tendencies. Harry frowned. He hadn't really considered it. I guess I have had a lot of incidents. Your magic is powerful, Harry. Raw and untrained, but powerful. Maman says it's because of what happened when you were a baby. Surviving the killing curse might have amplified your natural abilities. This was news to Harry. While the Delacours had been open about his history and fame, they rarely speculated about the source of his magical abilities. So I can't just, not use magic, he asked. No more than you can stop breathing, Fleur said matter-of-factly. It's part of who you are. Harry slumped into a chair opposite her. Then what am I supposed to do? If they can trace me no matter what, and your father can't stop them forever. Fleur closed her book with a decisive snap. We need a different approach. If we can't prevent the trace, perhaps we can confuse it. How? I'm not sure yet. But there must be a way to mask your magical signature, or disguise it somehow. She stood up, already heading for the shelves of advanced magical theory books. Research, Harry. When in doubt, research. For the next week, Harry and Fleur spent every spare moment in the library, poring over books on magical detection and concealment. Most were far beyond Harry's reading level, but Fleur translated and simplified the complex magical theories, displaying a talent for instruction that surprised him. Gabrielle, not to be left out, appointed herself their assistant, fetching books and bringing snacks when they worked through mealtimes. Even at 4½, she seemed to understand the seriousness of their task, refraining from her usual chatter when they were deep in concentration. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a formal dinner with several of Sebastian's ministry colleagues, carefully selected individuals who could be trusted with Harry's presence, the conversation turned to magical detection methods. The proposed British trace is quite sophisticated, commented Madame Rosier, an elderly witch who had once headed the Department of Magical Security. Based on principles developed during their war, when they needed to track down Muggleborns in hiding. Is there no countermeasure? Apollon asked, her tone casual though her eyes flicked briefly to where Harry sat, unnaturally quiet, beside Gabrielle. Madame Rosier sipped her wine thoughtfully. Countermeasures are always tricky with detection magic. Blocking the trace entirely would itself be detectable, like finding a blank spot on a map. What about confusion rather than concealment? Sebastian suggested. Creating so much background noise that the specific signature becomes impossible to isolate. The elderly witch nodded approvingly. A sound theoretical approach. In practice, however, it would require generating magical signatures similar enough to the target to create confusion, but distinct enough not to be immediately identified as decoys. Harry exchanged a significant look with Fleur across the table. This was the confirmation they needed for the approach they'd been researching. After dinner, when the adults moved to the drawing room for coffee, Harry and Fleur pulled Gabrielle into a quiet corner of the hallway. Did you hear what Madame Rosier said? Fleur whispered excitedly. Confusion, not concealment. It's exactly what we've been thinking. But how do we create magical signatures similar to mine? Harry asked. Fleur's eyes gleamed with the intensity she always showed when solving a complex magical problem. We've been approaching this from the wrong angle. We can't create fake versions of your signature, that would require advanced magic beyond even Maman's abilities. But we can trigger your actual magic in multiple locations simultaneously. How? Harry and Gabrielle asked in unison. With these, Fleur said, pulling several strands of dark hair from her pocket. I've been collecting them from your hairbrush, Harry. And I found a reference to a simple sympathetic magic ritual in one of Maman's old books. If we combine your hair with certain magical catalysts and place them in different locations around France, when the trace is activated, it will detect your signature coming from multiple places at once. Harry stared at her, impressed and slightly unnerved by her thoroughness. Would that work? In theory. The trace is designed to locate a single source. If it detects identical signatures from, say, Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and here, it will create confusion in the system. Where would we put these magical catalysts? Harry asked. That's the difficult part, Fleur admitted. We can't leave the estate without adults, and we can't explain this to them without revealing that we've been eavesdropping and conducting unauthorized magical research. Gabrielle, who had been listening with unusual attentiveness, suddenly spoke up. What about Tante Mathilde? She's visiting next week, and she always brings me presents from all over France. Fleur's eyes widened. Gabrielle, that's brilliant. Tante Mathilde travels constantly for her work with magical creatures. If we could convince her to carry the catalysts. But wouldn't that put her in danger? Harry asked, concerned. Not if she doesn't know what they are, Fleur said thoughtfully. We could disguise them as something else, good luck charms, perhaps, or protective amulets. The plan took shape over the following days. Fleur created 4 small pouches, each containing a strand of Harry's hair combined with magical herbs and crystals designed to amplify magical signatures. The pouches themselves looked innocuous, small silk drawstring bags with decorative embroidery that Gabrielle claimed to have made herself. When Tante Mathilde arrived, Apollin's younger sister, a vibrant witch with the same silvery hair but a more adventurous spirit, Gabrielle enacted her part of the plan with surprising skill. Tante Mathilde, I made you special good luck charms, she announced during tea in the garden. 1 for each of your houses. Mathilde, who maintained residences in Paris, Lyon, and Marseille in addition to a cottage in the countryside, was delighted by her niece's thoughtfulness. How clever of you to remember all my homes, ma petite, she said, examining the small pouches. And such lovely embroidery. Fleur helped, Gabrielle admitted, following their agreed-upon story. But they're special magical charms. You have to keep 1 at each house for the magic to work properly. Is that so? Mathilde asked, amused by the child's earnestness. And what magic do they perform? They bring good luck and protection. Gabrielle declared, repeating the words Fleur had coached her to say. But only if they're in all 4 places at once. It's sympathetic magic, she added, using the technical term with careful pronunciation. Mathilde laughed, tucking the pouches into her handbag. Then I shall certainly place them in each of my homes. Such a thoughtful gift deserves to be used properly. 2 days later, after Mathilde's departure, Fleur reported success. She mentioned to Maman that she'd placed Gabrielle's charming little gifts in each of her residences. The catalysts are in position. Harry felt a weight lift from his shoulders. While he still didn't fully understand the magical theory behind their plan, having taken action, any action, gave him a sense of control he'd been lacking since learning about the trace. Will it really work? He asked Fleur. She shrugged, suddenly looking more like the 9-year-old she was rather than the confident magical theorist she sometimes appeared to be. I hope so. It's the best plan we could develop with our limited resources. Thank you, Harry said sincerely. For helping me, for coming up with the idea, for everything. Fleur looked slightly embarrassed by his gratitude. I didn't do it just for you, she said, though without her earlier coldness. If they find you here, it affects all of us. I know. But still, thank you. A small smile touched Fleur's lips, a genuine one, without her usual reserve. You're welcome, Harry. The implementation of the British trace came 3 weeks later. Sebastian returned home early from the ministry, his expression grim but with an underlying hint of satisfaction. It's done, he announced to the assembled family. The trace has been activated across magical France. And? Apollon asked tensely. A smile broke through Sebastian's diplomatic mask. And within minutes, the monitoring office was in chaos. They detected Harry's magical signature simultaneously in Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and, most strongly, somewhere in this general region, though they couldn't pinpoint the exact location due to our wards. So it worked. Harry exclaimed, then quickly covered his mouth, realizing he'd given away their secret. Sebastian's eyebrows rose. What worked, exactly? Fleur straightened in her chair, meeting her father's gaze directly. Our countermeasure. We created magical catalysts using Harry's hair and sympathetic magic principles, then had Tante Mathilde place them in each of her residences. Sebastian and Apollon stared at the children in astonishment. You did what? Apollon finally managed. Fleur explained their research and plan in precise detail, with occasional enthusiastic additions from Gabrielle. As she spoke, the adults' expressions shifted from shock to amazement and, finally, to reluctant admiration. This was extraordinarily dangerous, Sebastian said when she'd finished. Unauthorized magical experimentation, involving a third party without their knowledge, potentially exposing your aunt to scrutiny. But it worked, Fleur pointed out, unrepentant. It did, Sebastian conceded. Claude is beside himself. The British representatives are claiming our detection network is flawed, and the French officials are insisting the fault lies with the British trace design. The entire operation has devolved into mutual recrimination. Are we in trouble? Harry asked anxiously. Sebastian and Apollon exchanged one of their communicative looks. You should be, Apollon said severely, though her eyes betrayed a hint of pride. What you did was reckless and potentially dangerous. However, Sebastian continued, it was also ingenious, well executed, and ultimately effective. The sort of thinking that, had it come from adult operatives, would merit commendation rather than censure. So, we're not in trouble? Gabrielle asked hopefully. Oh, you're definitely restricted from the library for the next week, Apollon said firmly. All of you. No independent research without adult supervision. But, Sebastian added with the hint of a smile, we are, impressed. The children exchanged triumphant glances, accepting the mild punishment as a small price to pay for their success. What happens now? Harry asked. With the trace, I mean. Sebastian sighed, his brief moment of levity fading. Now we enter a new phase of this diplomatic chess match. The trace will continue, they'll try to refine it, to filter out the false positives. And Claude will look for new angles of attack. But we've bought time, Apollon pointed out. Time to strengthen our position, to build support within the ministry. Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. Indeed. And perhaps it's time we took a more proactive approach. Defense has served us well, but a strategic offensive might serve us better. What kind of offensive? Harry asked, both nervous and intrigued by this new direction. Political, primarily, Sebastian explained. Building alliances, gathering information on the Levesque's vulnerabilities, maybe even reaching out to sympathetic elements within the British magical government. You mean fighting back, Fleur said with satisfaction. I mean changing the terms of engagement, Sebastian corrected gently. The Levesques want to use you as a pawn, Harry. It's time we demonstrated that you're actually a knight, unpredictable, able to bypass standard defenses, and far more valuable than they realize. Harry considered this chess analogy, finding it oddly comforting. He'd spent his life being moved around by forces beyond his control, placed with the Dursleys, mistreated, finally finding refuge with the Delacours only to face new threats. The idea of becoming an active piece in the game rather than a passive one appealed deeply. I want to help, he said firmly. Not just hiding and being protected. Actually helping. Me too, Fleur declared, while Gabrielle nodded vigorously. Sebastian smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and softened the diplomatic mask he so often wore. I believe you've all demonstrated your capacity to help quite effectively already, he said. And I suspect we'll need every resource available in the months ahead. As spring blossomed into early summer, the Delacour estate settled into a new routine. Sebastian's strategic offensive took shape through a series of careful political maneuvers, gradually isolating Claude Levesque within the ministry while building a coalition of support among those who valued French magical sovereignty over British concerns. Harry's education continued and expanded. With the immediate threat of the trace confused if not neutralized, Apollon began a more structured approach to his magical training, focusing not just on theory but on practical control. "Your accidental magic is both a strength and a vulnerability," she explained during one of their daily lessons. "We need to channel that raw power into controlled expression." Without a wand, which Harry wouldn't receive officially until he turned 11, this training took creative forms. Apollon taught him meditation techniques to sense his magical core, visualization exercises to direct its flow, and simple wandless charms that most children couldn't master until much later. To everyone's surprise, Harry showed remarkable aptitude for this approach. By early May, he could consistently light candles with a gesture, summon small objects from across a room, and even create simple shields that could deflect minor jinxes. "It's extraordinary," Apollon told Sebastian one evening after Harry had successfully maintained a Lumos charm without a wand for over 5 minutes. "Most adult wizards struggle with even basic wandless magic, yet he performs it almost instinctively. Could it be related to surviving the killing curse?" Sebastian wondered. Some fundamental change to his magical core? Perhaps. Or simply natural talent enhanced by necessity. Apollon's expression softened. He had to rely on his magic for protection from those horrible muggles. It developed as a response to danger, like a muscle strengthened through constant use. Whatever the reason, Harry's growing control provided another layer of security. If forced to defend himself, he wouldn't be entirely helpless, even without a wand, a fact that brought considerable peace of mind to all the Delacours. Fleur, not to be outdone, doubled her own magical studies, often joining Harry's lessons and turning them into friendly competitions. Her natural Vela abilities gave her advantages in certain areas, particularly fire-based magic and charms involving emotional influence, but Harry's raw power and intuitive approach to spellcasting often leveled the field. Gabrielle, too young for formal training but unwilling to be left out, appointed herself Harry's assistant, offering enthusiastic encouragement and occasionally serving as a test subject for harmless charms like color-changing spells for her hair or minor levitation. The children's days fell into a pleasant rhythm, mornings for lessons, afternoons for flying practice or exploring the extensive grounds of the estate, evenings for family dinners and strategy sessions where Sebastian would update them on political developments in terms they could understand. It was during one such dinner in late May that Sebastian shared an unexpected piece of news. "I've received a rather interesting invitation," he announced, setting aside his napkin. "The British Ministry is hosting an international conference on magical cooperation next month. As France's Director of Magical Foreign Affairs, I'm expected to attend." "In Britain?" Apollon asked, her concern evident. "Is that wise, given the circumstances?" "Actually, I believe it presents a unique opportunity," Sebastian replied. "While in London, I could make discreet inquiries about Harry's situation, perhaps even discover who precisely is behind the search for him and why. It could also be a trap," Fleur pointed out with her characteristic directness. "To get you away from us, from the estate's protections." Sebastian smiled at his daughter's perceptiveness. A valid concern, but unlikely. The conference was planned months ago, before Harry's disappearance became a diplomatic issue. Besides, Claude will be there as well, representing international cooperation. He can hardly arrange any moves against our family while in Britain himself. Unless he's coordinating with British allies, Harry suggested, his lessons in political strategy beginning to take root. "Precisely why I think it's worth the risk," Sebastian agreed. "If there is coordination between the Levesques and certain British factions, this conference offers a chance to observe it directly." "You shouldn't go alone," Apollon said firmly. "I had thought to bring Fleur, actually," Sebastian replied, causing the girl's eyes to widen in surprise. Her first diplomatic function. Educational, and it would reinforce the image of a routine family trip rather than a covert mission. Fleur sat up straighter, clearly delighted by the prospect of being included in such an important event. At 9, nearly 10, she was approaching the age when young witches and wizards from prominent families were traditionally introduced to the wider magical political sphere. "What about me?" Harry asked, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. He understood why he couldn't go to Britain, of all places, but the thought of being left behind stung nonetheless. "You and Gabrielle will remain here with Apollon," Sebastian said gently. "The estate's protections are strongest with her present, and your continued magical training cannot be interrupted." Harry nodded, accepting the logic even as he fought down a flicker of envy toward Fleur. As if sensing his feelings, Apollon added, "Besides, I've planned something special for you while they're away. Tante Mathilde has agreed to visit and bring some magical creatures from her sanctuary for you to study. Practical experience to complement your theoretical lessons." This brightened Harry's mood considerably. Mathilde's stories about her work with magical creatures had fascinated him since her last visit, and the prospect of seeing some of these beings up close was genuinely exciting. The preparations for Sebastian and Fleur's journey to Britain consumed the next few weeks. Fine robes were ordered for Fleur, diplomatic briefings were studied, and security arrangements were meticulously planned. The night before their departure, Harry found himself unable to sleep. A vague anxiety had settled in his chest, not just about being separated from Sebastian and Fleur, but a deeper unease he couldn't quite name. After tossing and turning for hours, he finally gave up and padded quietly to the kitchen for a glass of water. To his surprise, he found Sebastian already there, sitting at the small table used for informal family breakfasts, a cup of tea cooling before him. "Can't sleep?" Sebastian asked gently as Harry entered. Harry shook his head, getting himself a glass of water before hesitantly joining Sebastian at the table. "Bad feeling," he admitted. Sebastian nodded thoughtfully. "Intuition shouldn't be dismissed. What exactly is troubling you?" Harry struggled to articulate the nebulous sense of wrongness. "I don't know. Just, something doesn't feel right about you going to Britain. Like something bad might happen." Instead of dismissing this concern, Sebastian considered it seriously. Magical intuition can be powerful, especially in those with natural talent. "Do you sense danger specifically, or just general unease?" "Just, unease, I guess." Harry sipped his water, embarrassed now to have brought it up. "It's probably nothing. Just me being worried about you and Fleur going away." Sebastian smiled gently. "Perhaps. Or perhaps your magical senses are picking up something I've missed. Either way, I appreciate the warning and will be extra vigilant." The simple respect with which Sebastian treated Harry's concerns, neither dismissing them as childish fears nor alarming him further by overreacting, was typical of the man's approach to parenting. It was one of many reasons Harry had come to admire and trust him so completely over the past months. "You know," Sebastian continued, "your father had exceptional magical intuition as well. James Potter was known for his uncanny ability to sense danger, which served him well both as a Quidditch player and later, during the war." Harry perked up at this new information about his father. The Delacours had been gradually sharing what they knew of his parents, building a more complete picture than the lies and silence the Dursleys had offered. "He did. How do you know?" "I met him once, actually," Sebastian revealed. "Before you were born. A British-French diplomatic function, not unlike the one I'm attending tomorrow. He wasn't there officially, the Potters weren't politically active during the war, but he was accompanying someone who was. We spoke briefly about the rising tensions. He struck me as remarkably perceptive about which factions were gaining influence, which were vulnerable." Harry tried to imagine his father, a young man not much older than Sebastian was now, engaging in diplomatic conversations, sensing the political currents. It was a very different image from the reckless, unemployed drunk the Dursleys had described. "Did you meet my mother too?" he asked hopefully. "No, unfortunately. But her reputation preceded her. Lily Potter was known as one of the most brilliant witches of her generation, particularly gifted in charms and potions. Your Professor Slughorn, a noted potions master at Hogwarts, apparently counted her among his most exceptional students ever. Harry absorbed this information hungrily. Each detail about his parents felt like recovering a piece of himself that had been stolen away. "Thank you," he said simply, "for telling me about them." Sebastian nodded, understanding the deeper gratitude behind those simple words. "You should try to sleep," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be busy, even for those of us staying behind." Harry returned to his bed, his anxiety not entirely gone but somehow easier to bear after the quiet kitchen conversation. Whatever happened during Sebastian's trip to Britain, Harry knew with absolute certainty that he would return. The Delacours weren't just protecting him out of duty or political calculation, they genuinely cared. And that certainty was worth more than all the protective enchantments combined. The morning of Sebastian and Fleur's departure arrived with unexpected fog shrouding the estate, a meteorological oddity for early June. Apollon frowned as she looked out the windows at the swirling mist. "Strange weather," she commented. "The magical barometers showed nothing unusual yesterday." "Just fog, Maman," Fleur said impatiently, too excited about her first diplomatic journey to care about weather anomalies. She looked older than her 9 years in her formal traveling robes, her silver blonde hair neatly braided and pinned. Sebastian, however, shared Apollon's concern. "Check the protective wards," he said quietly. "Just to be certain." Apollon nodded, moving to the ornate cabinet where the family's ward stone was kept, a polished crystal that glowed with the complex network of protective enchantments surrounding the estate. She laid her hand upon it, closing her eyes briefly. "The wards are intact," she reported. "No signs of tampering or unusual magical signatures in the vicinity." Sebastian relaxed slightly. "Good. Probably just an unseasonable weather pattern, then." The family gathered in the main hall for farewells. Gabrielle clung to Fleur, extracting multiple promises to bring back presents from London. Harry stood more quietly, still troubled by the vague unease he'd felt the night before. "Remember what we discussed," Sebastian told him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Trust your intuition, but don't let fear rule your actions." Harry nodded. "Be careful in Britain," he said seriously. "Especially around anyone connected to my aunt and uncle." "We'll be staying entirely within magical areas," Sebastian assured him. "The conference is at the ministry itself, and our accommodations are in Wizarding London. There's no reason for us to venture into Muggle territories." This was somewhat reassuring, though Harry's concern wasn't just about the Dursleys. His instincts told him the greater danger came from the magical side, from whoever had arranged his placement with abusive Muggles, whoever was so determined to find him now. After final embraces and reassurances, Sebastian activated the International Port Key, a special diplomatic instrument that bypassed the usual restrictions on cross-border magical travel. In a flash of blue light, he and Fleur vanished, leaving only the swirling fog where they had stood moments before. Almost immediately, Apollon turned to the children with a brisk clap of her hands. "Now, we have our own agenda while they're away. Tante Mathilde arrives tomorrow with her magical creatures, and we have preparations to make." The next several days passed in a blur of activity. Mathilde arrived with an astonishing menagerie of magical creatures, bowtruckles that built elaborate stick structures in the garden, a pair of young measles that took an immediate liking to Harry, and even a baby hippogriff that required elaborate handling rituals before approaching. Harry threw himself into learning about each creature, finding that the practical experience of interacting with magical beings brought his theoretical studies to life in ways books never could. The baby hippogriff, in particular, seemed to form a special bond with him, allowing him closer than anyone except Mathilde herself. "Remarkable," Mathilde commented after watching Harry bow to the hippogriff for the 3rd time, receiving an immediate bow in return. "Aristeas doesn't usually warm to strangers so quickly. You have a gift with magical creatures, Harry. They're easier to understand than people sometimes," Harry admitted. "They don't hide what they're feeling or thinking." Mathilde laughed. "True enough. Animals, magical or otherwise, are honest in their reactions. No political machinations or hidden agendas. The day stretched pleasantly, with lessons in the mornings, creature care in the afternoons, and evenings spent playing magical board games or listening to Mathilde's stories of her adventures with dangerous beasts around the world. Harry's anxiety about Sebastian and Fleur's journey gradually faded as no troubling news arrived. On the fifth day, however, everything changed. Harry woke to find the estate once again shrouded in thick fog, even denser than the day of departure. When he went downstairs for breakfast, he found Apollon and Mathilde in intense conversation, their expressions grave. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, sensing the tension in the room. The sisters exchanged a look before Apollon answered. "We've received a somewhat concerning message from Sebastian. The conference is being extended unexpectedly, and he and Fleur will be delayed in returning." "Is that unusual?" Harry asked, not understanding why this would cause such worry. "International magical conferences operate on precise schedules established months in advance," Mathilde explained. "To suddenly extend one without prior notice is irregular." Sebastian's message was oddly worded as well, Apollon added. "Very formal, using phrases he typically avoids in family correspondence." Harry felt his earlier unease returning tenfold. "You think something's wrong? That he's trying to tell you something?" Apollon hesitated, clearly torn between honesty and not alarming the children. "I think it's prudent to take additional precautions until they return. The timing of this extension, coming just after Claude Levesque's failed attempts to locate you through official channels." She didn't need to finish the thought. Harry understood immediately. The extended conference might be a ploy to keep Sebastian away from the estate while something else was planned. "What about the fog?" he asked, gesturing toward the windows. "It came back the same day you got the message." This observation caused both sisters to look sharply out the windows, then at each other. "Twice in 1 week, in June," Mathilde said slowly. "That's not natural weather." "Concealment fog," Apollon whispered, her face paling. "A large-scale enchantment to hide movement or activity around a protected area." Without another word, she strode to the wardstone cabinet, this time removing the crystal entirely and placing it on the table. It glowed with a steady blue light, pulsing gently, apparently normal. "The wards detect no intrusion," she said, though her expression remained troubled. "But the fog itself is magical," Mathilde pointed out. "Someone is casting weather modification charms around the estate perimeter." "Preparing for something," Apollon agreed grimly. "But what?" Harry thought of all the political lessons Sebastian had given him over the past months. If Sebastian isn't here, and Claude Levesque is in Britain too, who would be acting in France? Who would have the authority? "Jean-Paul Levesque," Apollon answered immediately. "Claude's son in magical law enforcement. He could mobilize Aurors for a security operation with minimal oversight while his father is away. And with the British trace still active but confused by our countermeasures." Mathilde continued the thought. "They might have developed a more targeted approach," Apollon finished. "Something designed to penetrate our defenses or bypass the Fidelius charm entirely." Harry felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "What do we do?" Apollon straightened, her Vila heritage showing in the sudden fierce gleam of her eyes. "We prepare. If they mean to breach our defenses, they'll find it far more difficult than they imagine." The rest of the day was spent in urgent preparations. Gabrielle, not fully understanding the danger but sensing the gravity of the situation, was sent to stay with her grandparents through the secure Fleur connection. Mathilde's magical creatures were relocated to the most heavily warded section of the estate's grounds. Apollon and Mathilde reinforced the existing protective enchantments and added new layers of defense, alarm spells that would trigger at any attempt to disrupt the wards, redirection charms that would confuse anyone attempting to map the estate, and several nasty surprises for unwelcome visitors that Harry was not permitted to witness the creation of. "Vila battle magic," Mathilde explained with a grim smile when he asked what they were doing in the garden's perimeter. "Best you don't watch too closely. Some of it is rather vicious." By nightfall, the estate had been transformed into a magical fortress. Harry, exhausted from helping with the preparations he was allowed to assist with, finally retired to his room after Apollon insisted he needed rest. "Your magical reserves are still developing," she reminded him. "Overexertion now could leave you vulnerable if you need to defend yourself tomorrow." Harry reluctantly agreed, though he doubted he would sleep much with the threat of imminent attack hanging over them. To his surprise, however, he fell into a deep slumber almost as soon as his head touched the pillow. He woke to darkness and the sensation of someone's hand over his mouth. Panic surged through him before he recognized Apollon's voice in his ear. Quietly, she whispered. "They're here. Outside the wards." Harry nodded, and she removed her hand, helping him out of bed. She was dressed in what appeared to be battle robes, sleek, dark clothing that allowed for easy movement, with numerous concealed pockets for magical implements. "How many?" he whispered. "At least a dozen," she replied, guiding him toward the door. "Magical law enforcement, from their formations, but operating without official insignia. Mathilde is monitoring their movements from the West Tower." "What's the plan?" "You're going to the secure room beneath the library. It has its own Fidelius charm, with me as secret keeper, just as we arranged months ago." Harry remembered the contingency plans Sebastian had put in place shortly after his arrival, emergency measures that he'd hoped would never be needed. "What about you and Mathilde? You can't fight a dozen Aurors." Apollon's smile held no humor. "You'd be surprised what two Vila-blooded witches can do when protecting family. But we don't intend to fight unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is to delay and confuse until Sebastian can return with diplomatic reinforcements." She led him down the servants' passage to the library, tapping a specific rhythm on a section of wood paneling that looked identical to all the rest. The panel slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Remember," Apollon said, "once you're inside, no magic unless absolutely necessary. Any magical signature could penetrate the Fidelius if strong enough." Harry nodded, taking the small bag she handed him, containing food, water, and basic supplies. As he prepared to descend the stairs, a loud, shrill alarm suddenly pierced the quiet of the night. "The outer wards," Apollon breathed. "They're attempting to breach." From somewhere above came the sound of breaking glass, followed by Mathilde's voice calling out a warning in rapid French. "They're moving faster than expected," Apollon said urgently. "Go, Harry. Now." Harry hesitated. "I can help." "I've been practicing." "No," Apollon cut him off firmly. "Your safety is what matters. Everything else is secondary." A tremendous crash echoed from the front of the house, followed by shouts and the distinctive crackle of aggressive spellfire. "They've breached the main entrance," Apollon said, her voice hardening as she drew her wand. "I must go help Mathilde." "Get inside, Harry. Please." The raw concern in her voice decided him. Harry nodded and slipped into the hidden staircase, hearing the panel slide closed behind him. The narrow steps descended into a small, comfortable room equipped with a bed, bookshelves, and basic amenities, a place designed for extended hiding if necessary. He sat on the edge of the bed, straining to hear what was happening above. Muffled shouts and the occasional thud of something heavy falling reached him, but the room's enchantments dampened most sounds. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Harry sat in mounting anxiety, imagining the worst. Were Apollon and Mathilde overpowered? Had the intruders broken through all the defenses? Were they searching the house room by room, getting closer to discovering him? A sudden, earth-shaking explosion made even the secured room tremble. Harry jumped to his feet, his heart pounding. That was no standard Auror spell, it was something far more destructive. Without conscious thought, he moved toward the stairs, driven by fear for Apollon and Mathilde's safety. The rational part of his mind argued that he should stay hidden, that he'd only endanger himself and complicate their defense by emerging. But a deeper instinct, the same one that had warned him about Sebastian's trip to Britain, told him something had gone terribly wrong. Just as he reached the stairs, the panel at the top slid open, revealing not Apollon or Mathilde, but a tall, thin man with a pointed beard that Harry recognized immediately from the Christmas inspection, Jean-Paul Levesque. "Well, well," the man said, his cold smile reminiscent of his father's. "The famous Harry Potter, hiding in a cellar like a frightened house elf. How the mighty boy who lived has fallen." Harry backed away, fear and confusion warring within him. How had Levesque found the hidden entrance? How could he see Harry despite the Fidelius charm? "Wondering how I found you?" Jean-Paul asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Your dear protector, Madame Delacour, was most helpful after the right persuasion. Vila are resistant to the imperious curse, but not to other forms of encouragement." Cold fury replaced Harry's fear. "If you've hurt her, you'll what?" Jean-Paul laughed. "You're a child. A valuable political asset, nothing more." He descended the stairs slowly, wand held casually at his side. "Come quietly, and perhaps we'll be lenient with your adoptive family. Resist, and, well, we've already had to subdue the Vila sisters rather forcefully. Further resistance would be unfortunate for them." Harry's mind raced. He had no wand, limited wandless abilities, and no way of knowing if Apollon and Mathilde were truly captured or if Jean-Paul was bluffing. His eyes darted around the room, looking for anything that might help. "Thinking of fighting?" Jean-Paul asked, amusement in his tone. "Please do try. It would justify more decisive action." As the man reached the bottom of the stairs, Harry made his decision. He wouldn't go quietly. The Delacours had risked everything to protect him, he wouldn't surrender without at least attempting to help them. Drawing on all the training Apollon had given him, Harry focused his magic and thrust his hand forward, channeling raw power into the simplest but most forceful spell he knew. "Expelliarmus," he shouted, pouring his will into the disarming charm. To both their surprise, the spell worked, not with the precision of a wand cast, but with raw, unfocused power that not only tore Jean-Paul's wand from his grasp but also threw the man backward against the wall with bone-jarring force. Not waiting to see if he would recover, Harry darted past him, up the stairs, and through the panel into the library. The scene that met his eyes was one of devastation. Bookshelves had been toppled, furniture destroyed, and the elegant ceiling was partially collapsed. Worse, through the library's broken windows, Harry could see figures moving across the grounds, dark shapes in the fog, approaching the house from multiple directions. The magical fog that had concealed their approach now worked against the defenders, making it impossible to determine how many attackers remained. Harry moved cautiously through the ruined library, listening for any sound that might guide him to Apollon or Mathilde. A groan from behind an overturned desk drew his attention. He found Mathilde there, bleeding from a head wound, her wand hand clearly broken. "Harry," she gasped when she saw him. "No, you must hide, they're here for you. Where's Apollon?" he asked urgently, kneeling beside her. "Garden, fighting." Mathilde winced in pain. "Too many of them. They knew exactly how to counter our defenses." A cold voice from the library doorway interrupted. "That's because we had excellent intelligence." Harry whirled to see Claude Levesque standing there, looking immaculate despite the destruction around him. Behind him stood another familiar figure that made Harry's blood run cold, a tall man with long platinum blonde hair and aristocratic features, holding a silver-topped cane. "Mr. Potter," the blonde man said smoothly. "What a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. Lucius Malfoy, at your service." Harry stood, positioning himself protectively in front of Mathilde. "You're supposed to be in Britain. At the conference." "A convenient fiction," Claude replied with a dismissive wave. "While my son kept your protectors occupied here, Lucius and I were free to make certain arrangements. Including ensuring Sebastian Delacour and his daughter remained delayed in London." "What have you done to them?" Harry demanded, fear for Fleur and Sebastian overriding his own danger. "Nothing permanent," Lucius answered, his cultured voice somehow more frightening than Claude's open malice. "They're simply detained. A minor diplomatic chapter 2, the French sorcerer. The lofty blue spires of Beauxbatons Academy pierced the morning mist, looking more like a fairy tale palace than a school. Harry Potter stood at the edge of the carriage landing platform, watching as massive Abraxan horses tossed their golden manes in the distance. 4 years had passed since his escape from Privet Drive, 4 years of safety, family, and growth with the Delacours. Now, at 11, he faced his next great adventure, formal magical education. "Stop fidgeting," Fleur hissed beside him, smoothing her already immaculate pale blue uniform robes. At 14, she had grown into her Vila heritage with devastating effect. Boys throughout the arrival courtyard kept stealing glances at her, only to quickly look away when she glared back. "I'm not fidgeting," Harry muttered, though he immediately stopped adjusting his collar. "Your tie is crooked," she said, reaching over to straighten it with practiced efficiency. "There. Now try not to embarrass me on our first day." Despite her words, Harry caught the ghost of a smile on her lips. Their relationship had evolved from initial hostility to reluctant acceptance and finally to something resembling sibling affection, though Fleur would sooner drink stink sap than admit it. "Harry!" A familiar voice broke through the crowd. 9-year-old Gabrielle darted between arriving students, dodging disapproving looks from upperclassmen as she launched herself at her adoptive brother. "You forgot your lucky quill." Harry caught her with practiced ease, swinging her around once before setting her down. "Thanks, Gabby. I'd have been in trouble without it." He accepted the silver-tipped quill, a gift from Sebastian for his 11th birthday, and tucked it carefully into his robes. "Gabrielle." Apollon called, making her way through the crowd with Sebastian. Unlike many parents who simply dropped their children at the arrival point, the Delacours had insisted on accompanying Harry all the way to the main courtyard. Given the threats that had followed him to France, no one questioned this precaution. "You'll be wonderful," Apollon said, straightening Harry's robes one final time. The hint of moisture in her eyes betrayed emotions at odds with her composed exterior. "Remember everything we've practiced." Sebastian placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Academic excellence is important, but so are allies," he said quietly. "Beauxbatons is more than a school, it's where the next generation of French magical society forms its first connections." Harry nodded, understanding the subtext. Even here, politics wouldn't entirely release its grip on his life. "First years, gather at the Fountain of Flamel," called a melodic voice. A tall witch in elegant periwinkle robes stood at the base of an ornate silver fountain, her wand emitting blue sparks. "That's Madame Maxime's assistant," Fleur explained. "I need to join the 4th years. Try not to get lost before dinner." With that parting shot, she glided away, a wake of admiring glances following her. After final embraces and whispered encouragements, Harry separated from the Delacours and joined the cluster of first years. Most were speaking rapid French, though he caught snippets of other languages, Spanish, Italian, even what sounded like Dutch. Another foreigner. A boy with meticulously styled dark hair sized Harry up with calculating eyes. "British, from your accent. I didn't realize Beauxbatons had started a charity program." Several nearby students snickered. Harry recognized the speaker immediately, Matthew Levesque. Though they'd never formally met, Harry had seen him at ministry functions with his father Claude, who had eventually regained his position despite the scandal of the attack on the Delacour estate. The Levesque's political resilience was matched only by their ongoing animosity toward the Delacours. "Not charity," Harry replied evenly, his French fluent after years of immersion. "Selective enrollment. Excellence knows no borders, after all." A girl with corkscrew curls and intelligent eyes laughed appreciatively. "Well said. I'm Soline Moreau." She extended her hand with confident grace that reminded Harry of Fleur. "Harry Delacour," he replied, using the name he'd adopted for school, an arrangement Sebastian had secured through careful negotiation with both Beauxbatons and the French ministry. His true identity wasn't exactly secret, but neither was it advertised. The compromise helped reduce unwanted attention while acknowledging his place in the Delacour family. Matthew's eyes narrowed at the name. Delacour? Ah, you must be the stray they took in. Father mentioned something about that. A distant cousin, wasn't it? The deliberate emphasis made it clear Matthew knew exactly who Harry was. Before Harry could respond, the assistant's voice rang out again. Follow me, first years. Madame Maxime awaits you in the grand salon. The opulence of Beauxbatons far exceeded anything Harry had imagined, despite Fleur's detailed descriptions. The palace-like school was a symphony of blue marble, silver filigree, and enchanted crystal that captured and refracted sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. Living statues bowed as they passed, while ceiling frescoes depicting famous magical discoveries shifted and moved, their painted occupants demonstrating historic spells in eternal loops. Their journey ended in a vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling depicting the constellations. At its center stood the largest woman Harry had ever seen, easily 12 feet tall, regally dressed in satin robes and magnificent opals. Bienvenue à Beauxbatons, Madame Maxime intoned, her accented voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. For centuries, our academy has cultivated the most refined magical minds of Europe. Here, you will learn not merely to perform magic, but to perfect it. Her dark eyes swept over the assembled first years, seeming to evaluate each one individually. When her gaze reached Harry, it lingered briefly, a flicker of recognition passing across her features before moving on. Unlike some schools that divide students into competing houses, she continued, Beauxbatons believes in unity and collective excellence. You will be organized into cohorts based on your magical affinities, determined by our traditional evaluation. She gestured gracefully, and 5 pedestals rose from the marble floor. Upon each sat a different magical object, a silver bell, a crystal sphere, a small fountain pen, a miniature golden scale, and what appeared to be an ordinary river stone. The artifacts of affinity will guide your educational journey, Madame Maxime explained. When your name is called, approach and extend your hand over each artifact. One will respond to your innate magical nature. One by one, students were called forward. The artifacts responded in various ways, the bell chiming, the sphere glowing, the pen writing in midair, the scales tipping without weights, the stone hovering. Each reaction sorted students into their cohorts, harmonists, visionaries, scribes, arbiters, or elementals. Delacour, Harry, the assistant finally called. Harry approached the pedestals, conscious of whispers following him. He extended his hand over the bell first, nothing. The sphere remained dark, the scales motionless. When he reached the pen, it twitched slightly but didn't rise. Finally, his hand passed over the simple river stone. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The stone not only levitated but began to glow with an inner fire, spinning rapidly in midair before shooting upward 10 feet, then hovering there, pulsing with light. Murmurs swept through the chamber. Madame Maxime's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Elemental, she declared, though her tone suggested this was stating the obvious. And quite powerfully so. The stone gradually descended, returning to its pedestal as Harry stepped back. He caught Matthew Levesque's calculating stare from across the chamber, no longer dismissive but wary. Levesque, Matthew, the assistant called next. Matthew strode forward with practiced confidence. The sphere glowed brightly at his touch, marking him as a visionary. He shot Harry a triumphant look, as though his sorting were somehow superior. Once all first years had been assigned their cohorts, Madame Maxime explained that while core subjects would be taught to all students, specialized instruction would differ by affinity. Elementals like Harry would focus on magic involving natural forces and physical transformation. Visionaries like Matthew specialized in divination, enchantment, and magical theory. Your cohort is not just your academic focus, she concluded. It reflects your magical essence, how your inner power manifests. Understanding this is the first step toward magical mastery. The students were then led to their respective dormitories, located in different wings of the palace according to their cohorts. The elementals were housed in the eastern tower, with windows facing the sunrise and rooms decorated in earthy tones of terracotta and moss green. Harry found himself sharing a comfortable suite with 3 other boys: Julien Baudin, a cheerful, stocky boy from Marseille; Reza Nazari, a serious Iranian student with careful, precise movements; and Maurice Lefebvre, a lanky, freckled boy who couldn't stop grinning at everything around him. "Did you see the stone's reaction to you?" Maurice exclaimed as they unpacked. "I've never heard of it flying that high. My older sister said the artifacts barely move for most people." Harry shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just luck, probably." Reza shook his head. "Not luck. Power. My father works with elemental magic. He says it's the most primal magical affinity, connected to raw forces rather than refined constructs." "Well, I'm just happy not to be a scribe," Julian laughed. "My penmanship is terrible. Imagine having to write everything perfectly for the next 7 years." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime, signaling dinner. The 4 boys joined the stream of students flowing toward the dining pavilion, an airy space with high arched windows and tables arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Harry spotted Fleur already seated among the 4th years, deep in conversation with several classmates. She caught his eye briefly and offered a small nod, her version of enthusiastic encouragement. As Harry settled at one of the first-year tables, Soline Moreau slid into the seat beside him. "Elemental, huh? No wonder Levesque looks like he swallowed a lemon. His family thinks visionaries are naturally superior, something about refined magical perception." "And what's your cohort?" Harry asked. "Arbiter," she replied, indicating her table companions. "We're supposedly the diplomatic ones, with magic attuned to balance and judgment. Though I've been told I'm not very diplomatic," she added with a mischievous grin. Before Harry could respond, the air shimmered with soft music as wood nymphs emerged from decorative alcoves, their harmonies signaling the start of the feast. Food appeared on golden plates, not with the abrupt magic of British house elves, Harry had learned, but with a gradual materialization that the French considered more aesthetically pleasing. The meal was exquisite, featuring regional specialties from across magical France. Conversation flowed around Harry as students compared cohort assignments and formed initial impressions of one another. He listened more than he spoke, cataloging names and relationships in the way Sebastian had taught him, mapping the intricate social networks that would influence his time at Beauxbatons. One voice cut through the pleasant buzz, deliberately pitched to Carrie. "Of course, the Delacours have always had a peculiar fascination with raw magical elements," Matthew was saying to his tablemates. "Perhaps it's the Vila blood, creatures of fire, after all. Barely removed from the primitive." Several students glanced uncomfortably between Matthew and Harry, sensing the provocation. Fleur, too far away to hear the comment, nevertheless seemed to detect the tension, her posture straightening as she scanned for the source. "Is he always this pleasant?" Harry asked Soline quietly. "Levesque? He's actually on his best behavior tonight," she replied with a roll of her eyes. "His family's been feuding with half the French magical nobility for generations. Something about pure bloodlines and proper magical heritage." "Sounds familiar," Harry murmured, thinking of what he'd learned about British pure-blood ideology. Some toxic ideas transcended borders. The remainder of the evening passed in a whirlwind of introductions and orientation. Prefects guided first years through the essential school protocols, how the animated schedule scrolls worked, where to find the magical libraries. There were 3, each specializing in different branches of magic, and the etiquette expected of Beauxbatons students. "Remember," their elemental prefect concluded, "at Beauxbatons, we value grace as highly as power. Magic performed clumsily is magic half-mastered." When Harry finally retired to his bed that night, his mind whirled with impressions and information. Beauxbatons was everything the Delacours had described and more: beautiful, refined, steeped in magical tradition. Yet beneath the polished surface, he sensed currents of the same politics and prejudice that existed in the wider magical world. As he drifted toward sleep, Harry reminded himself of Sebastian's advice: observe first, act second, and never reveal your full capabilities until necessary. It had kept him safe through 4 years in France, it would serve him well at Beauxbatons too. What he didn't yet realize was how quickly necessary would arrive. Harry's first month at Beauxbatons passed in a blur of new experiences. The Academy's approach to magical education differed significantly from what he knew of Hogwarts through Sebastian's diplomatic connections. Where the British school focused on distinct subjects with practical applications, Beauxbatons taught magic as an integrated art form, with theory and execution inseparable. Each morning began with foundations, core magical principles taught to all students regardless of cohort. Afternoons were dedicated to affinity-specific instruction, where elementals worked primarily with Professor Thibault, a weathered wizard with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to contain actual flames when he demonstrated particularly powerful spells. Magic is not a tool, Thibault told them during their first elemental session. It is a relationship. Especially for elementals. Fire does not obey you, it agrees with you. Water does not serve you, it collaborates. Earth does not yield to you, it accommodates. Forget this, and the elements will remind you, painfully. Harry found himself excelling in these lessons, his natural affinity for magic enhanced by years of private instruction with Apollon. While other first years struggled to produce even simple elemental effects, small flames, moving pebbles, or water droplets suspended in air, Harry could conjure and control them with ease. Remarkable control, Monsieur Delacour, Thibault commented after watching Harry transform a small flame from orange to blue to white-hot in precise gradations. Most first years cannot modulate elemental temperature with such precision. This praise, delivered casually before the entire class, earned Harry both admiring glances and resentful stares. Chief among the latter was Matthew Levesque, whose own visionary training allowed him to observe magical auras, including, apparently, the distinctive signature of Harry's powers. He's not even trying to hide it, Matthew told his growing circle of supporters one day in the dining pavilion, his voice deliberately carrying to where Harry sat. That distinctive magical aura, British, not French. Anyone with proper visionary training can see it. The question is, why would the Delacours import foreign magic into Beauxbatons? What are they planning? Harry maintained his outward composure, though inwardly he seethed. The implication that his Chapter 3, The Two Worlds, ages 14 to 17, opening, the Triwizard Tournament announcement creates turmoil for Harry, who knows his peaceful life in France is about to collide with his British past. Act 1, the tournament debate about Harry joining the Beauxbatons delegation to Hogwarts. Political maneuvering by Sebastian to protect Harry's identity. Harry decides to go but disguised / under an assumed name. Emotional departure from younger Gabrielle, who fears losing her brother. Arrival at Hogwarts, seeing the world he might have grown up in. Act 2, the reckoning. Harry observes the British wizarding world with outsider eyes. Fleur is selected as Beauxbatons champion. Harry works behind the scenes. To help her, someone at Hogwarts begins to suspect Harry's identity. Snape. Moody. Harry encounters students who would have been his classmates. Act 3, the exposure. Harry's identity is discovered during a critical moment. Chaos erupts as British ministry officials try to take custody. The Delacours arrive to protect their son. International magical incident as French versus British jurisdiction is disputed. Harry demonstrates extraordinary magical ability defending himself and the Delacours. Act 4, the return of darkness. Voldemort's agents make their move, targeting both Harry and the Delacours. Harry's connection to Voldemort intensifies, giving him insight into plans. Sebastian Delacour is attacked. Gravely injured. Harry must work with both French and reluctant British allies to protect both worlds. Major battle sequence where Harry shows his unique French-trained magical style. Act 5, the new Guardian. Harry accepts his role as protector of both magical worlds. Negotiates a new status with both ministries. Romantic subplot culminates, with Fleur or another character. Final confrontation with the main antagonist. Resolution that leaves Harry firmly rooted in his French identity but acknowledging his British destiny. Epilogue showing Harry creating a bridge between the two magical communities. Chapter themes: destiny, dual identity, international magical politics, romance, large-scale magical conflict. This outline provides a framework for the 310,000+ word chapters, each with distinct conflicts, antagonists, and character growth for Harry. The story progresses naturally from his childhood escape to his emergence as a powerful wizard with feet in two worlds. I've incorporated elements of action, political intrigue, personal challenges, and romance as requested. Harry Potter, the Prodigy of Beauxbaton's detailed story outline. I've developed a 3-chapter novel that follows Harry Potter's journey after escaping the Dursleys at age 5 and finding a new home with the Delacour family in France. Each chapter covers a distinct period in Harry's life with unique conflicts and character development. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.